This 21st century loser was cooking instant noodles. Suddenly, he time-traveled to a world where men love each other. He became the mate of a queen in name only. The first scene he encountered was a brutal childbirth. As a seasoned spectator and avid reader of time travel novels, he desperately wished for someone to appear with a walkie-talkie, telling him to leave as an outsider. He prayed internally, hoping this was just a dream if it wasn't a film shoot. The next moment, a maid beside him pushed him, saying, "Aster, what are you doing? Hurry and bring some hot water." Everything felt too real. Even the weak cries and constant moans of the so-called queen seemed so authentic. After a chaotic scene, the queen successfully gave birth to a prince. But he couldn't feel happy at all. Strangely, even the emperor didn't show up. Soon after, all the maids were sent away. He hurriedly looked for a mirror. After seeing his appearance, his face was instantly covered in black lines. This Aster looked exactly like him. No wonder his hands and feet felt so real, just like his own body. Life is too cruel. Although he loved fantasy novels in school and longed for this world, even hoping for a cave leading to this world to appear. Now, not only did he not meet a handsome man saying, "I've come to pick you up," but he wasn't even given beauty or intelligence buffs. After calming down, he had to admit he had come to another world, and he was just an extra without any buffs. Not long after, the emperor finally remembered to come see his newborn child. When the maids saw the man beside the emperor, they were all indignant. How could he bring him here? The queen just gave birth to the prince and has to see them. It's too pitiful. It turned out the man beside the emperor was named Yuga. Aster was still marveling that with his looks, he could definitely become a popular idol if he debuted. However, his true identity was the king's lover, and he was beloved by all. After the emperor left, Aster looked at the queen's still expressionless face, like a puppet doll, and understood everything. He could guess what the maid would do next. How miserable this queen was. The young and powerful king fell in love with an extremely handsome man. Any treasure in the world was nothing compared to having each other in their eyes. Many people were moved by the beautiful love between the king and the man. The king wanted to give everything to the man, but he couldn't give him the position of queen. Their love faced a huge obstacle. The queen was the king's fiancée copyright since childhood. Her child was destined to be the heir to the throne. But as the female lead of the story, she could only live her life according to the setting. The poor queen not only entered the palace without a coronation ceremony, but also lost her palace, symbolizing her status because the king's lover said, "The queen's palace is really beautiful." She was deprived of her symbolic palace. And just because of one sentence, "I envy the queen for being able to attend events with the king," she was forbidden to attend. She thought she could live a peaceful life after moving to a separate palace. But she was confined just for encountering the king and his lover during a walk. Even the child she struggled to give birth to was taken away by the man. In such circumstances, anyone would turn evil. But sadly, until the queen died of illness, she maintained her kind and virtuous nature. Aster now felt his head buzzing. He had actually transmigrated into this novel. Logically speaking, if he were the protagonist, he would just need to follow the original storyline to complete the task of returning. But he was just an insignificant character. He was devastated. Does he have to wait until the queen dies to return? Just then, his roommate Mina asked with concern, "What's wrong today?" Although Aster really wanted to say, "Who am I?" he was afraid of raising suspicion. He could only say that it was his first time seeing childbirth, and he was a bit scared. Suddenly, Mina held her hand, comforting her. "It's okay. We were all born that way." Kindness was the only buff Aster possessed through Mina. Now he could only pretend to be the original Aster and gather some information. After Mina left, she looked through the original Aster's belongings. There were only 2 music boxes, a pen, and some jewelry and cosmetics. In the end, she couldn't find a way to understand the original Aster. A few days passed. Since the prince was born, the king never visited the queen's palace again. But his lover, Yuga, often lingered at the palace gates. It was said he came in once yesterday, but left quickly. Although everyone felt it was strange, no one expected things to develop so seriously. Early in the morning, the emperor personally brought many soldiers to the queen's palace. The king brought a group of soldiers to the queen's palace, where she was still in confinement. He arrested all the maids who were loyal to the queen, just because they didn't show respect to the king's lover, Yuga. The king wouldn't spare anyone who might threaten Yuga, so he often barged into the queen's palace looking for trouble. After the king left, the maids discussed heatedly. Do they want us to say welcome to that vixen? For Aster, who had just transmigrated, it was clear that the king indeed wanted everyone to do that. Although it was unfair to the queen, to survive, they should just do these small things. Aster smiled brightly at Yuga and asked, "Is there anything I can help with?" The few months of part-time work as a call center agent weren't for nothing. Even if you can't see the face, you must keep smiling. The tone should be patient and extremely respectful. The looks from other maids behind her, as if looking at a lunatic, were truly heartbreaking. Yuga was very satisfied with Aster's attitude. After asking for her name, he said, "I want to see the child." Aster loudly relayed this to the head maid. After reporting to the queen, the two came to the prince's room. Yuga gently picked up the child, greeted the baby, and touched his face. The little prince even reached out and grabbed Yuga's finger. If a Madonna painting came to life, it would probably look like this. Indeed, even children like good-looking people. Suddenly, the head maid glared at Aster ominously, as if saying, "How dare you bow and scrape to Yuga in the queen's palace? Confess your guilt immediately." But Aster was just a minor character without a backstory. She only wanted to survive until she could return. A few days later, the king sent Knight Mio to specifically guard the little prince's safety, but it was obvious he was there to monitor. In the novel, as the little prince's knight, he loved Yuga so much that he instilled hatred for the queen and the little prince from a young age. Now Mio was swearing the knight's oath, willing to protect the prince with his life. The queen arranged for Mio to stay in the room opposite the prince's, and asked him to convey thanks to the king. "The child hasn't even been named yet, but you've already granted him a guardian knight." Aster couldn't help but admire the queen's character. At night, roommate Mina relayed to Aster that the head maid wanted her to help the wet nurse tomorrow. This arrangement made Aster an indispensable character. The female lead Aster replaced the injured maid, helping the wet nurse take care of the little prince. But she never imagined she would encounter such a shocking scene. The king, with a gloomy face, asked the wet nurse, "I remember you came with the queen from her maiden home." The wet nurse respectfully answered, "Yes, your majesty. I've been serving the queen since she was little." The next moment, the king drew his sword and executed the wet nurse. Wet nurse Carmen is suspected of colluding with dark mages. Arrest her immediately. Then the body was dragged away. Aster was splattered with blood. The strong smell of blood made her feel like she was about to faint. Fear filled his brain. The king threw the bloody sword on the ground. He called for Yuga in a voice so gentle it was chilling. The king gently wiped the blood off his face. "Blood splattered on you. I'm sorry." Yuga held the little prince. They looked like a family of three, smiling frighteningly in such a bloody scene. Aster could only helplessly curse these two lunatics in her heart over and over. Suddenly, Yuga smiled and greeted Aster. He reached out and pulled her up. "I thought you were a serving maid. Sorry for frightening you." Aster was trembling with fear, but Yuga kept smiling brightly. "You must be scared. We used some extreme measures earlier because we were worried you might run away." The king came over and asked, "Is this the maid you mentioned?" Then he reached out and lifted Aster's chin. He said expressionlessly, "Perfect. My son's wet nurse is gone. You'll be the one now." The two handed the child to Aster and left. Just then, the queen came in and glanced at Aster. Seeing the pool of blood on the floor, she understood everything. The queen, her heart as dead as ashes, walked out of the room expressionlessly without saying a word. And so, Aster became the little prince's wet nurse and nanny. It had been a full month since she arrived here. Only now did she learn her full name was Aster Kane. No wonder in the novel, when mentioning the prince, it would describe, by the prince's side always stood Sir Mio with his cold eyes and a young wet nurse. This young wet nurse was Aster Kane, still seemingly a nameless minor character. How could one survive in such a position? Should she stay true to the original story and get close to the protagonist, or disrupt the plot? The transmigrated maid accidentally became the young wet nurse of the little prince. Perhaps she could imitate Knight Mio, brainwashing the little prince. constantly whispering in his ear, "Your father is a big jerk." The next day, the head maid called Aster over and explained that royal wet nurses would be granted quasi-noble status. Having read the original story, Aster knew this was equivalent to raising her rank in the marriage market. Quasi-nobles themselves couldn't inherit titles, but if their spouse also had quasi-noble status, their children could inherit. So, young unmarried quasi-nobles like Aster would be in high demand. It seemed her idle life was finally about to turn around. She fantasized about young, handsome knights coming for her. Aster's sweet daydream was interrupted by the head maid's loud voice. "From the moment you sign this contract, you'll be responsible for raising the prince. Please consider it carefully." Aster felt bitter inside. This was the king's order, not something she could consider. Then she picked up the contract, but she instantly froze. "I am illiterate. I, a top scorer in the college entrance exams Chinese subject, have fallen so low. This is utterly humiliating." Strangely, why would an illiterate person have a pen among their personal belongings? She could only weakly tell the head maid that she couldn't read. Actually, being illiterate was quite normal for a commoner. However, now that she was to raise the prince, she couldn't have such a basic flaw. The head maid would send a teacher to teach Aster. On her first day as a wet nurse, Aster moved to the room next to the prince's. The queen's breastfeeding times were 3 times a day, morning, noon, and night. But besides these times, the queen didn't want to see the little prince, because she hated the smell of children in her room. The queen's attitude towards the little prince was even less kind than towards the maids. Aster could understand. She quietly held the child, comforting him. "Your dad doesn't care about you. Your mom doesn't love you, just because you're not the fruit of love. But not all children are born from love. So, you're not that unfortunate." Soon, a new character appeared, Sir Saya, the teacher chosen by the head maid for Aster. His elegant demeanor and strikingly handsome appearance made Aster exclaim with joy. At least it gave her a bit more motivation to study. What's it like to take care of a child and study at the same time? In the early hours, while the maids were still asleep, Aster had to get up to care for the child and study, as Sir Saya only had this time slot available. Even Mio had to wake up early. Aster struggled a bit, feeding the child while listening to the lecture. Fortunately, the letters here were similar to English, so learning wasn't too difficult. Before the prince grows up, Aster needs to teach him some basic knowledge, so the learning will focus on being able to read fairy tales. Aster nodded seriously in agreement. Suddenly, Sir Saya smiled and leaned closer. "Now, please call me teacher." Aster looked at Saya up close. Her face suddenly turned red with shyness. It seemed she hadn't been in love for too long and had no resistance to handsome men. During this time, Yuga often came to the little prince's room. Aster couldn't help but ponder. If the little prince could remember, would he recall Yuga who occasionally came to sing for him, or the queen who fed him 3 times a day? Watching Yuga sing, Aster couldn't help but ask, "You seem to like the little prince a lot." Yuga, holding the child, smiled happily. "It's fortunate that you're the prince's wet nurse." Aster was also grateful to have become the wet nurse. In the novel, many people escaped to avoid danger, but there was no scene of the wet nurse being executed. She should be able to survive until the end, right? Yuga told Aster that if she needed anything while caring for the little prince, she could always tell him. Aster remembered what the queen had said about not naming the child yet, so she told Yuga that the little prince needed a name and a doctor. Yuga was a bit surprised. He didn't expect Aster to actually make requests. This made him look at her with new respect. Yuga stated that the child's name should be chosen by the king and queen. This sudden display of humble reasoning left Aster in disbelief. Yuga continued, "I'll talk to His Majesty about the doctor. After all, the child is weak." Suddenly, he leaned close to Aster. "Let me tell you a secret. King Aegis actually loves his son very much." This news shocked Aster. But before she could ponder the meaning of these words, the child care battle began. The female lead became a mother without pain. She experienced that raising a child is torture, and raising someone else's child is even more of a hellish punishment. Luckily, during the day, Ailey, who was skilled in childcare, helped out. But at night, it was like going through hell. After many days of nonstop work, Aster fell asleep during a dictation test. Teacher Saya asked Aster if she had received any education before. Aster thought to herself that she was actually a top student, but could only deny it out loud. Looking at Aster's test paper, Saya felt that she seemed to have learned some basics from a non-professional, as if she knew how to write words and pronounce various letters. Hearing this, Aster thought she might be a genius. Could it be that she got a perfect score? When she happily received the graded test paper, she found that there were very few correct answers, and the number of wrong answers was like rainfall. But on second thought, given the limited study time, this score was acceptable. Just as she finished that thought, she blacked out again. It said that many new mothers suffer from depression and cry all the time. Aster wasn't a new mother, so why did she feel like crying too? Ailey, concerned, told Aster to rest against the wall for a while. She immediately saw Sir Mio, looking equally exhausted from lack of sleep. Now they both had to watch the little prince 24 hours a day, and they were truly exhausted. Aster walked over to the wall and sat down. She said to Mio, "Are you still alive? As long as I have a pillow and blanket, I can sleep soundly. How about you?" Mio was still hanging on. "We knights can basically adjust our sleep schedules. Now, every night when the little prince cries, both of them wake up startled and run to the prince's room. If this continues every day, they'll surely die from overwork." Aster kept talking to herself. "Tonight, I'll bring the little prince to sleep in my room. This way, when he wakes up, I can feed him right away. If you're not a light sleeper, why don't you come sleep in my room too?" After processing this in his mind, Mio felt that a single man and woman sharing a room wasn't a good idea. As a 21st century woman, Aster didn't see any issue with it. "Let's just consider it our fate. This way, we can both get more sleep." Aster hadn't been sleeping well and felt like she was getting dumber. She needed to keep her mind active. What did Yuga mean when he said the king loved his son very much? Childcare was too exhausting. There was no time to consider it. In this state, she might step on a landmine any day. Not long after, a small bed was added to Aster's room. Aster had actually suggested to Sir Mio that they sleep in the same room, because this way, both of them could get more sleep. From their first meeting, Mio thought Aster was a strange woman. She looked ordinary, but was very bold. Looking at her now, she was indeed very strange. In the morning, while having breakfast with the little prince, the two were chatting. Aster asked about the libraries location, as she wanted to find some books on childcare. It would be better to learn directly from experienced people, but that was clearly impossible. The little prince in her arms seemed to be in a good mood, babbling and playfully tugging at Aster's hair. Suddenly, Aster turned to Sir Mio and said, "If you're done eating, come talk to the little prince for a while. I can quickly eat my meal too." Afraid Mio might refuse, Aster emphasized it would only take 5 minutes. Then she started eating quickly. Mio, holding the little prince, looked a bit flustered, not knowing what to say. He looked just like a new father. Aster, while chomping on her food, said he could talk about anything. First love or ideal type, anything would do. But in her heart, she thought it would be better if he could talk about Yuga. Sir Mio, holding the little prince, softly talked about his hometown. Aster reminded him loudly to hold the little prince where he could hear his heartbeat, as it would make him feel more secure. Mio seemed a bit impatient. At night, Aster asked curiously why other guardian knights worked in shifts, but Mio was on duty around the clock. Learning it was the emperor's wish, Aster couldn't understand. He supposedly loved his son, yet didn't name him or come to see him. He just sent a few people to take care of him. It was very strange. Now Aster desperately needed her own time to study childcare guides and gather information. She studied late into the night and decided to learn from teacher Saya how to write a proper proposal. That day, Aster and Queen Fei came to the little prince's room. Aster asked Queen Fei what name she wanted to give the little prince. Queen Fei just calmly stated that he was the legitimate heir to the throne, so His Majesty should name him. Her own thoughts didn't matter. After a pause, the queen told Aster that she had thought before, if it was a boy, she'd name him Yuzhen. Queen Fei had wanted to name the child Yuzhen since she became pregnant. The little prince, who was drinking milk, lifted his head upon hearing this name, as if he liked it. After handing the child to Aster, Queen Fei mentioned her milk was decreasing, so they'd need to increase the formula amount in the future. Then she left the room. This meant she wouldn't see the little prince as frequently in the future. She didn't seem to have much affection for this child. But the little prince, having seen his mother, was very happy. Aster handed the child to Ailey and resumed her studies. But writing a proposal seemed more difficult than she imagined. As expected, it was full of errors. Aster wanted to cry. At her age, she still had to rush assignments. The next day, Yuga came to visit the little prince again. After Aster curtsied, she sarcastically commented that his green clothes suited him very well. She emphasized that not everyone could pull off that color. Yuga naturally didn't understand Aster's hidden meaning and was quite pleased. Then he gently touched the crib. He marveled at how fast the child was growing. "I won't be able to come for a while. If he forgets me, I'll be so heartbroken. Aster outwardly asked with concern about why he couldn't come, but inwardly she cheered, hoping he'd never come back. Yuga smiled and replied, "The war is over." Aster understood. They had finally turned the page on the escape chapter of the novel. After the war ended, the little prince's name would be announced. Sleep-deprived Aster dozed off again in class. She unexpectedly learned that teacher Saya and the head maid were actually cousins. Aster was shocked. One was gentle and caring, the other cold as ice. To have such a relationship, surely one of their genes must have mutated. When teacher Saya pointed out the mistakes Aster often made, he appeared nonchalant, saying everyone makes mistakes. Living earnestly was already difficult enough. Saya gently patted Aster's head. He comforted her kindly. To write an essay like this is already quite good. You've worked hard. Suddenly, Aster's face turned bright red with embarrassment. Changing the subject, she asked, "You must be busy lately, right?" Lord Yuga said the war is over. Hearing this, Saya's handsome and gentle face showed a hint of anger. That fairy, has he been coming to the queen's palace often lately? Sir Saya actually referred to the king's lover as a fairy. Aster had thought all the men in the escape chapter liked Yuga. She didn't expect there to be someone who disliked him. Aster replied, "He often comes to play with the little prince lately." Suddenly, her eyes lit up. Now that the war is over, will there be a parade or something? Gorgeous dresses, parades, night views. These were all things Aster dreamed of. Saya explained that to conceal the fact that this was just a temporary ceasefire, not a victory, this time it would be very grand. Even the king would go out to welcome the troops. Seeing Aster's longing expression, teacher Saya gently promised, "If you're free during the parade, I'll take you out to see it." But before the parade, the proposal needed to be revised. Aster was overjoyed and instantly became motivated. As she picked up the fountain pen to write, she fell into thought. Why did the original owner, who was illiterate, carry a fountain pen, and such a high-end one at that? Moreover, the initials on it weren't Aster's. Whose initials were these? One day, Aster went to pay respects to the queen, but she encountered Yuga at the same time. The wife and the concubine in the same room, with the child between them. How strange. The queen, teasing, spoke first, praising Yuga's beauty. She said she wanted to touch him herself. Yuga asked flirtatiously, "Do you want to touch me?" The atmosphere between them was suffocating. Queen Faye refused and left the room. Yuga, as if nothing had happened, hugged the little prince tightly. "We haven't seen each other in a while, have we? I'll soon give you a very beautiful gift." Then he glanced at Aster. "I quite like you. I'm in a good mood now. As a gift, I can grant you one wish." Aster clearly knew that when Yuga said he liked her, it was like liking a tail-wagging puppy. How arrogant. Aster mumbled softly, "My wish. I want to turn off the stove that's cooking my instant noodles." Yuga asked what instant noodles were. Aster smiled and said she was just joking. If possible, she hoped the queen's palace budget could be increased. Aster knew in her heart that happy lovers would stay happy forever, and the queen might be unhappy forever. So she thought about what she could change and what she couldn't, hoping to achieve happiness within her capabilities. Suddenly, Yuga said to Aster, "Next time we meet, I hope you'll become prettier." Hearing this, Aster was stunned. This marked a turning point. It meant the storm was about to come. There are countless love stories in this world, but not as many happy endings. Yuga and the king's love should be happy. But what about Sir Mio and Sir Alex, who also loved Yuga? And those unnamed admirers, would they find happiness in love? Yuga handed the little prince to Aster and was about to leave, but he accidentally tripped while turning around. This action frightened everyone around. Alex and Mio anxiously rushed forward at the same time, extending their hands to support him. Then people from outside the room also ran in, concernedly asking if Yuga was hurt. Aster witnessed the whole process from behind. She silently cursed, hoping they would all fall down the stairs. Just then, Aster saw Mio staring at her. He smiled foolishly as his hand brushed past Yuga's. He liked Yuga. Surely, he must know his own feelings by now. That night, Aster was very happy because she had successfully written the proposal, and the head maid had approved her request for leave. She sat on the balcony, enjoying the breeze. If only she had a beer to go with it, it would be perfect. Suddenly, Mio appeared behind her. Aster called him over to sit beside her. She then told him he should hold the little prince more often, as she and Ellie wouldn't be there during the celebration. Mio calmly stated that he wasn't a nanny, and guards didn't need to be that close to their masters. Aster began to imagine extreme scenarios. What if you need to hold him and hide in a dangerous situation? What if he cries when you hold him? Be cautious. Live longer, Mio simply replied. The best way is to mind your own business. Suddenly, Aster stared at Mio meaningfully and asked, "What exactly do you like about him?" Mio wasn't sure himself. He just felt like there was a fountain in his heart. Whenever he saw or thought of him, that spring would gush forth. Aster asked, confused, "But you can't have a future together. Don't you feel sad?" Mio stared at Aster for a long time without responding. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew, messing up Aster's hair. Mio unexpectedly reached out to fix it, revealing a meaningful smile. The two chatted under the beautiful moonlight. How would you react if someone mistook you for being in love with a child? As the little prince grew day by day, his sleeping time became shorter. He also got heavier each day, almost breaking her wrists and shoulders. Aster eyed Mio standing by the wall, hoping he could help hold the little prince more often. But he insisted he wasn't a nanny. Then, sighing helplessly, he said, "I can teach you a method to strengthen your arms." Suddenly, Ellie poked Aster's back from behind. She asked in a low voice, "Are you two dating?" Hearing this, Aster bristled. "Are you cursing me to never get married?" Ellie spoke calmly. "You eat together every day. You look so sweet. What's the problem?" She patted Aster's shoulder, looking confident. "Just let me know when you need me. I'll help you ruin Sir Mio's marriage prospects." Hearing this, Aster glanced at Mio. Although the suggestion was very tempting, he liked Yuga. If he married him, he might end up like Queen Faye. Currently, Ellie mainly took care of the little prince during the day, while Aster was responsible for the night. So Aster kept brainwashing the maids. If anything happened to either of them, there wouldn't be enough people to care for the little prince. So the head maid added another helper. But when they saw Anna, they shook their heads repeatedly. The little prince was very shy around Anna, so they had to teach Anna how to take care of children while also tending to the increasingly demanding little prince. It was exhausting. Just then, Sir Saya asked Aster when she would be taking a break. He could accommodate her free time. Hearing this, Aster suddenly perked up as if injected with adrenaline. She excitedly jumped up from the sofa, repeatedly confirming if Sir Saya would really accompany her that day. She planned to take a day off when the expeditionary force entered the city, as the first day would be the grandest and most meaningful. After they made the arrangement, Sir Saya left. And so, the 5-day countdown began. Aster was instantly energized and full of life. She entrusted the little prince to Sir Mio, instructing him to feed the prince milk to stimulate his appetite. Then, saying she'd be right back, she rushed out in a flurry, leaving a bewildered Mio behind. What's it like when your friend is more excited about your date with a man than you are? It was late at night. Aster rushed into the bedroom. In a whirlwind, she pulled up her two sleeping maid companions. She shouted, "I'm really in a hurry. Wake up," while shaking them. Aster panted, "It's a big deal. In 5 days I'm going to watch the parade, but I have nothing to wear." Her two friends yawned, casually responding, "Just wear what you have now. It's fine to be ordinary." But Aster said, "I'm going with a man." Hearing this, the two's pupils dilated, instantly filled with fighting spirit. "Quick, bring out all your clothes. Don't you have anything other than these funeral-worthy outfits?" Aster waved her hand helplessly. "I only have these clothes. That's why I'm asking for your help." Her friends were puzzled. "Don't you have any family? What did you do with your salary if not buy clothes?" Learning that the original owner was an orphan in this situation was truly heartbreaking. Then the two hurriedly dragged Aster, striding towards the door. With the help of many maids, Aster finally gathered many clothes and accessories before her day off. She finally chose Surface teardrop earrings, Jessie's orange dress, and Mina's lace shawl. Early in the morning, Pepe carefully did Aster's hair, and Anna applied all her makeup skills on Aster's face. Finally, she was ready to go out. Aster was moved to tears by everyone's kindness. Just then, Mio, holding the little prince's hand, pointed at Aster and said with a hint of jealousy, "Your nanny hasn't taken good care of you for days because she's preparing for her date." He continued rambling, "I'll keep reminding him about you going on a date and leaving him before he's even 100 days old until he's 20. Aster wasn't flustered at all, but rather smug. "I'll help you too if you ever go on a date. Oh, by the way, all right? No one switched shifts with you, right? Want to copy my suggestion letter?" At this moment, Anna suddenly asked, "Sir Mio, aren't you going to get ready?" Both of them looked puzzled. The female lead was all dressed up for a date, yet someone was calling for Mio to get ready. It turned out everyone thought Aster was going out with Mio, because in their view, Mio was the only man Aster usually interacted with. She usually met Sir Saya in the early hours, so even Ellie, her closest friend, had never seen him. Aster described that she was going on a date with someone else, a gentle, kind, and trustworthy man. The entire royal city was very lively, a scene of peace and harmony. The parade was about to begin. Aster accidentally bumped into a man next to her. Seeing this, Saya gently pulled her close. They stood close together, which was a bit safer. This action captured Aster's heart. She thought Saya was just handsome like an elf, but didn't expect him to be so manly when protecting someone. Suddenly, flower petals rained down from the sky, and the crowd instantly became excited. The city gate creaked open. The two were squeezed out of shape in the massive crowd. Actually, this war could be said to have achieved nothing. The king and ministers feared the people would feel uneasy, so they tried every means to make the entry ceremony as festive as possible. The knights entered. Leading them was Klein. It was said he was seriously injured, but he seemed to deliberately hide it, as it wasn't visible at all. Aster knew. He was one of the characters who appeared after the war ended. He was the king's confidant and the country's pride as a top military commander. Although he strongly opposed the war initially, he couldn't overcome the king's firm attitude. He could only shoulder the role of general and go to war, only returning now. Although he didn't contribute much to the escape ritual, it was because of his presence by the king's side that Yuga's followers didn't act rashly. After this war ended, that person also returned. He was the great mage Sil, who could command the entire continent. At the little prince's naming ceremony, he was the one who offered blessings to the king and the little prince. But after the war, he suffered from severe post-traumatic stress disorder. In the novel, there's a story about how Yuga helped Sil overcome his trauma. Aster curiously looked around, but everyone was wearing armor. It was impossible to tell who was who. The parade was in progress. Aster, in the crowd, was trying to find out what the characters from the novel looked like. But Aster hadn't paid much attention when reading the novel, so her memory seemed to be faulty. One thing was certain. Among these people must be Saron, the one who caused the queen's family to fall. Although he hadn't fallen for Yuga yet, but in the future, he would offer his heart to Yuga. After all, he was also an unfortunate count. The brief parade ended. Saya politely asked Aster what she wanted to eat. Aster only said she wanted something spicy, but in her heart, she was crying rivers. She missed instant noodles and the taste of fried chicken and rice sausages. But even if she said that, no one would understand. The two arrived at the restaurant together. Saya let Aster, who could now read, order the food. Aster picked up the menu, reading out some unfamiliar dishes. He was shocked. He seemed to understand, but what was actually written? Why did it sound like a spell when read aloud? So in the end, Saya ended up ordering the food. Aster listened, lost in thought with the knife and fork. This action puzzled Saya. Aster looked at her own hands. The part of myself I see most isn't my face, it's my hands. So lately, I've been wanting to hurt these hands to wake myself up. Now when I open my eyes in the morning, I can't even tell who I am before I start thinking about what work I need to do today. She was even confused. Did Mom wash the clothes I put in the washing machine the day before yesterday? On the way out, do I eat a vegetable sandwich or... Whenever I think of these things, I want to wake myself up, face reality, and stop thinking about the past. Facing Saya's puzzled expression, Aster could only smile and say she just wanted to remind herself to live earnestly today as well. Saya sensed that Aster was hiding something. He untied his hairband and tied a bow for Aster. He gently comforted her. When you want to wake yourself up, look at the bow together instead of a wound. It would be better. This gesture warmed Aster's heart. Such a gentle and considerate Saya was hard not to love. The female lead and Saya watched the parade on their date. After dining, the two went to the square to buy gifts. Suddenly, Aster noticed the fountain in the middle of the square. Mio had said before that when he thought of Yuga, it felt like a fountain constantly gushing in his heart. What kind of feeling was that exactly? Aster curiously asked, "What do you men buy when you come to places like this?" Saya said, "Men and women aren't that different," while buying a bouquet of flowers for Aster. "Actually, we all come to buy things that make people happy. It was a pleasant date today." Aster hummed a tune all the way back to the palace, carrying a basket. When she opened the door, Mio's resentful face suddenly appeared. In the darkness, it startled Aster, making her cry out. She exclaimed that her poor heart couldn't take it, remembering that in the past, whenever she stayed out overnight, her father would wait in the living room. For a moment, she thought it was him. Aster hurriedly changed the subject, saying, "Sir Mio, I bought you a cake. Let's eat together." Actually, This was bought with money borrowed from Sir Saya. Until now, Aster still didn't know where the original owner had hidden her money. Mio looked unhappy. I don't eat sweets. Don't you know that? Oh no, she stepped on a landmine again. Aster could only hurriedly cover for herself. Then next time I'll buy you flowers. What flowers do you like? Mio directly refused. I don't want anything. Hearing this, Aster silently complained in her heart. If he had added just having you is enough, I might have fallen for him. Aster couldn't help but be narcissistic. Does he like me? He just hasn't realized it himself. Otherwise, why would he make such a sour face when he sees me going on a date with Saya? But looking at Mio's frowning, displeased expression, she felt she was overthinking. Mio sighed and asked, "Did you have fun today?" Aster's eyes lit up, excitedly talking nonstop. Today's grand parade was like a real celebration. Mio smiled insincerely and started complaining to the little prince. Your nanny only cares about having fun herself, not thinking about you at all. Just as he was about to leave, he stopped. There's something I've been wanting to say since this morning. Orange doesn't suit you at all. He then snorted coldly and left with a tsunder of face, looking like a jealous little wife. Indeed, a girl's wardrobe always lacks one suitable piece of clothing. That day, Aster received a notice. The emperor wanted her to bring the little prince to attend the ceasefire commemoration party. For her, this was terrifying. She was just an insignificant little maid, yet she had to attend a party. She had already imagined several scenes of palace intrigue. Suddenly, Ely calmly said, "You're done for. You don't have any clothes to wear tomorrow." Aster's face darkened. She had forgotten about this. The next day, Aster and Mio brought the little prince to attend the party. While waiting, Aster couldn't help feeling sad. The queen must be the last person in the palace to know the prince's name. Then she said to the little prince, "Do you know? Your mother originally wanted to name you Yujin. Isn't that name cool?" Although she couldn't change anything, at least she could let him know this name. Mio looked thoughtful. The three were called to the party venue. In the empty room behind, they needed to wait in advance. Aster, completely disregarding her image, sat on the floor against the wall. Mio reminded her that sitting in such a place would dirty her clothes. But Aster didn't care. No one would look at her anyway. "Me usted de esta, examining here. This outfit suits you better than the dress from a few days ago." Aster smiled and agreed that orange red indeed didn't complement my skin tone. She was crying rivers inside. This one was made by her sisters who stayed up all night. Why didn't the original owner buy some clothes? Hearing this, Mio muttered to himself, that dress wasn't that bad looking. To prevent others from seeing Aster sitting on the ground, Mio silently stood in front of her, just like a knight. After a while, Mio gently patted Aster's shoulder to wake her up. It was time for the little prince to make his entrance. The king and Yuga were standing on the stage. Aster knelt and handed the little prince to the king. Then the prince was lifted up. The king made a declaration. Under known blessings and unknown protection, this child was born. He will become the heir to the throne and is bestowed the name Calgran. Amidst the cheers of the crowd, the party officially began. How cruel this man was. He kept mocking the female lead's ugly appearance. The post-war celebration party was in progress. Suddenly, Yuga, holding the little prince, walked up to Aster. After giving the child to Aster, he smiled, patted Aster's shoulder, and leaned close to her. He whispered, "Even when you dress up, you're not that pretty, huh?" Hearing this, Aster wanted to see Sir Mio's reaction beside her, but she found him staring straight at Yuga, infatuated. Aster was furious inside. Although I'm not the type of beauty who'd be scouted on the street, no one has ever said I'm ugly. Why does he always bring up my appearance? But no matter how unhappy she was inside, she had to appear calm and pleasant on the surface. "Perhaps you're too beautiful, sir. Someone of my appearance doesn't meet your standards." Yuga sighed deeply, helpless. "Although you indeed don't look good, your mouth is pleasing. I'll let you off today." Suddenly, Yuga smiled brightly, his whole body radiating light. He said, "Actually, I quite like you too." His flowing golden hair and charming smile instantly made the crowd go wild. Everyone was intoxicated, but Aster alone felt chills down her spine. The party continued. Aster was watching over the little prince nearby. She recalled the novel's plot. In 3 years, Prince Carl would leave the queen's side. Aster's thoughts were interrupted by the noisy discussions around her. This new nanny looks so young. She seems unmarried, or perhaps a widow. I heard she was personally appointed by His Majesty. Perhaps she has some connection with him. Although she's nothing now, her future power shouldn't be underestimated. Being so young, lower-ranking nobles might personally approach her. It could be a good investment. Suddenly, a viscount walked out from the crowd. He introduced himself as Asna and asked for the female lead's name. Aster wasn't arrogant, but she wasn't naive enough to miss such simple calculations. Currently, King Carl's only heir was Prince Carl, and she was the prince's most trusted nanny, still an unmarried young woman. Although now just a quasi-noble, such a young woman with nothing could become the core of power in 20 years. So, they definitely wanted to win her over. Aster lifted her skirt and gracefully answered the question. Viscount, my name is similar to yours. I'm called Iskane. This man, I'd call him the Thunder of Jealousy King. The nobles at the party were discussing among themselves. The suddenly appeared Viscount Asna, deeply invited Aster to dance with him. Before Aster could react, Mio grabbed her arm. Pulling her behind him, he said, "Excuse me, she's the prince's nanny. Like me, she can't leave this place." The Viscount, rejected on her behalf, was embarrassed and sweating profusely. He could only slink away. Aster peeked at Mio and couldn't help but smile. At this moment, he was like her knight, coming to her rescue. Aster thanked Mio with a bright smile. "In the future, if there are noble ladies you don't like clinging to you, just let me know." Mio looked confused. Aster tilted her head and continued, "I'll help spread rumors that you have an illegitimate child." Clearly, this was a mischievous suggestion. Seeing the playful Aster, Mio wasn't angry, just helplessly sighed. At this moment, the crowd began to stir, because Count Klein had arrived. Everyone consciously parted to both sides. He was the country's top military commander and King Aegis's strongest weapon. The king suddenly stood up and joyfully rushed towards him. But Klein fell to his knees with a thud. "Your subject is guilty. I couldn't return victorious." With these words, everyone fell silent, especially the king, who instantly turned to stone. Aster inwardly exclaimed how amazing this was. The king had spent so much money and effort to cover up the fact that they hadn't won the war, yet the person involved just said it outright. The next second, Yuga stepped forward and grasped Klein's hand, trying to smooth things over. "Your safe return is a victory for all of us." Undoubtedly, such a smile and gentle words once again captured the hearts of the nobles present. But Klein remained expressionless. He yanked his hand away, not wanting to deal with him at all. The king, fearing Yuga would be hurt, immediately took his hand. Then he continued, "That's right. Count Klein's contributions are undeniable. He can be said to be our country's second treasure." Then he planted a loving kiss on Yuga's hand. Without even thinking, the king's first treasure must be Yuga. Seeing this scene, Aster felt nauseated. The king appointed Klein as the prince's guardian, proving his trust and friendship. This decision further intertwined his fate with Aster's. How clear-minded this man was. Finally, another person with a relatively correct perspective appeared. The party continued smoothly. In the crowd, the king and Yuga danced happily together. Klein helplessly let out a deep sigh. Sooner or later, this country would be ruined by Yuga's hands. Unable to bear watching anymore, he turned to leave. When he saw Aster in the crowd, he froze. Time seemed to stop. He murmured Aster's name. Aster, also seeing Klein, felt her heart skip a beat. At this moment, fear occupied her mind. Did the original owner know him? Perhaps this body wasn't just an ordinary commoner. Otherwise, how could she know such an important figure? Her hands trembled uncontrollably. While deep in thought, she was startled by Mio. Mio asked curiously, "Though I don't know much about women's clothes, isn't it strange to pair a black dress with a black ribbon?" After learning it was Sir Saya's choice, Mio got jealous. He criticized, "You wearing long sleeves is really ordinary." Aster felt annoyed. He just said it looked good, and now he's changing his mind. He muttered quietly, "I don't think much of your taste either." The party was in full swing. Suddenly, the bright ballroom turned pitch black. It was impossible to see one's hand in front of their face. The door suddenly opened, and a tinkling sound was heard. The great magician Hill walked in from outside. Everyone immediately began to discuss. Originally, with a great magician participating, victory seemed assured. But he had never experienced war before. On his first battlefield, he saw comrades dying all around him. Unable to bear the mental anguish, he fled from the troops, causing a huge shock and shadow over the kingdom. Hill came to apologize. Today was the joyous day of announcing the kingdom's heir. Although he was a deserter, he was still the great magician who established the continent's laws, so he came to bless the young prince. After receiving the king's permission, he quickly walked towards the young prince. He would receive the authority. In the future, he could fulfill one earnest wish. Then he'll use magic to inscribe a mark. A strong light illuminated the entire ballroom. Aster, being closest, instantly had her vision blurred. In the darkness, she was grabbed by a large hand and pulled outside. But even though she couldn't see clearly, that red hair was still dazzling. That's right, it was Klein. The male lead finally interacted with the female lead. In the pitch-black ballroom, Klein took advantage of the chaos to pull Aster out. Only Sir Mio noticed Aster's departure. After running for a while, Aster was panting heavily. She gasped for air. "What are you doing?" Klein didn't answer. Instead, he asked, very puzzled, "Why are you here?" Aster didn't know how to answer. What was the relationship between Klein and the original owner? How familiar were they? Should she respond respectfully or like an old friend? This was completely different from guessing the plot by observing expressions. This man had an eerie aura. He might kill her. She must survive and return. Suddenly, Aster countered, "Am I not allowed to be here?" Indeed, the best defense is offense. Seeing Aster's unexpectedly strong attitude, Klein was stunned at first. But then he became flustered and pitiful. "I was worried about you." Seeing this reaction, Aster knew she was on the right track. Could she be a princess from a neighboring country or Klein's sister? Klein anxiously asked, "Did that person drive you out?" Hearing this, Aster had already imagined a grand drama. A selfish father had a child with a maid, then abandoned his daughter and drove her out. So the brother who finally found his sister would say such lines. Aster's eyes lit up, overjoyed. Her transmigration journey finally had an identity and revenge plot. However, the next second, Klein said, "If that's the case, let me take you to my home. You must stay in a safe place." Aster instantly deflated like a punctured balloon. "I'm not his sister. Indeed, my life is no plot twist." Aster stated that she had already been appointed as the young prince's nanny by the emperor. But Klein anxiously said he would find a way to handle this. What kind of relationship did the original owner have with him to make this person, so loyal to the king, consider rebellion? Aster asked curiously, "Do you want me to leave the royal palace?" Klein just hoped she could stay safely by his side forever. Aster instinctively asked, "Are we that kind of relationship?" This fierce man in front of her actually had such a puppy-like side. Aster asked Klein about their relationship. Hearing this, Klein's entire demeanor deflated. He looked extremely disappointed. Aster was screaming internally. Why did he look so hurt? "I genuinely didn't know. That's why I asked." Aster wanted to step forward to explain and comfort him, but she accidentally stepped on her dress, losing her balance. Klein hadn't noticed the situation. He was talking to himself, "You are my precious Aster," crying profusely. It seemed like he was about to say something important. "But sorry, save me first." Aster was seen falling into the sea with a splash. The huge impact made her instantly lose consciousness. The next second, Klein jumped in after her without hesitation. When Klein pulled the unconscious Aster out of the water, Sir Mio suddenly appeared. With a cold expression, he sternly said, "Hand her over to me." When Aster opened her eyes in a daze, she found Mio gently comforting the nearly crying Prince Carl. Mio also noticed that Aster was about to wake up. He reached out to cover her eyes, letting her sleep a bit longer. The next morning, Aster felt like a rotten rag, smelling awful all over. She looked at Mio resentfully. "How could you throw a soaking wet person onto the bed?" Mio panicked a bit and retorted, "I didn't throw you on it." Aster angrily started being unreasonable. You should have changed my clothes." Mio quickly moved to stop her. He continued speaking. "The maids were off duty. No one could change your clothes. Sir Saya also tried to smooth things over. You couldn't expect Sir Mio to change your clothes, right?" He spoke while keeping his distance, laughing awkwardly. Let's end today's lesson here. The prince also doesn't seem to be feeling well. Aster looked down in confusion. She found the little prince frowning, almost crying from the smell. After taking a bath, Aster asked Mio how she got back yesterday. Mio didn't answer. Instead, he asked about her relationship with Klein. "Do you know what too many wolves, too little meat means?" Mio was jealous, inquiring about Aster and Klein's relationship. But now Aster wanted to know even more than him. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. 3 young knights with bright smiles walked in. They were just appointed as the little prince's guards today. After the three knights introduced themselves, Aster was very confused. She hadn't heard about this, but when she learned it was the king's order, she instantly accepted it. After all, she herself was parachuted in, and except for Mio, who volunteered, the rest were forcibly assigned from above. Aster displayed her professional fake smile. After some conversation, she learned they would be rotating shifts with Mio. They were all from the Knight Order, so they were basically commoner knights. Aster didn't expect the king to so blatantly appoint knights of common birth as the prince's guards. Although Aster felt very displeased thinking about the king's intentions, the gazes around her now were terrifyingly intense. Too many wolves, too little meat. These marriage-hungry maids were staring at the young knights like hungry wolves. Suddenly, Aster's eyes lit up. She asked with a grin, "Do you have girlfriends?" The three knights instantly felt a sense of fear. They could only use smiles to hide their awkwardness. It seems they've entered a wolf's den. A few days later, after learning about the knight situations, Aster excitedly told Ellie, "There's some good news I can let you have first." She looked at the three knights. None of them have girlfriends. "Which one do you want?" The three whispered among themselves. Ellie liked younger men, while Anna liked handsome, rich men with good bodies. Aster couldn't help but sigh. That's quite demanding, as expected of the most beautiful maid in the queen's palace. With Anna's conditions, there was no need to worry. It seemed she could arrange to repay debts to Pepe and Sev. Indeed, it wasn't a simple matter. Suddenly, Aster struck up a conversation with Mio beside her. With the increase in staff, Mio could now take shifts off. He rarely showed a smile. Aster cheered internally. Great, he seems to be in a good mood. Since a few days ago, after returning from watching the parade with Sir Saya, he had been looking displeased. He couldn't have thought I was slacking off, right? Aster hadn't considered the possibility that Mio might be jealous. This is the man I find most controversial, wavering between liking the female lead and the male supporting character. Aster, shaking out blankets on the balcony, saw Mio leaving alone to attend the last day of the festival. She felt somewhat touched, like watching a shut-in's rehabilitation training. She inexplicably wanted to cry. However, that night, Mio bribed other maids to cover Aster's shift. Then he dragged a confused Aster away. They arrived at the festival together. The bustling market atmosphere made Aster's eyes light up. This was the night market she had always wanted. Everything was sparkling. She excitedly tugged at Mio's clothes, not knowing where to start exploring. Bubble spheres floated in the air. She reached out like a child, wanting to touch them, but couldn't reach due to her height limitation. Seeing this, Mio helped her. When the bubble sphere burst, Aster laughed happily. She grinned. "You came back to pick me up. You must have found it boring to shop alone, right? We've raised a child together for a month. Haven't we developed deep feelings? I'm quite popular, you know." Mio said with a hint of jealousy. "That's true. You were indeed very popular at the party that day. But no matter what, you and I are in this together." Aster mused, "That's something I often say." At first, he wouldn't even listen. Looks like indoctrination education is quite effective. Then the two began their lovely date. Aster ran joyfully. She suspected she must have been a crow in her past life, loving shiny things so much. There were too many people at night. She accidentally tripped. As she fell rapidly, struggling desperately, Mio anxiously embraced her from behind. He whispered in her ear, "I just told you, you'll fall if you run so hastily." But Aster didn't care. She giggled and pushed his hands away. "I just heard there's a fireworks show today." Then she walked straight into a store. Mio muttered to himself, "I knew you'd like the fireworks show." It was obvious he had specifically brought Aster to see it. But Aster was already attracted by the dazzling array of goods before her, not hearing what he said. You see, Aster didn't intend to buy anything, thinking there was nothing she liked. But actually it was because she had no money. On the surface, she could only say, "Souvenirs like these end up in boxes, never to be taken out again." You had to agree, "Then I won't buy anything either." But he was examining the jewelry in the box. Seeing this, Aster said, "There probably isn't anything suitable for that person among these accessories." Why does the female lead feel sorry for this man? The two browsed the store together. Mio, however, was carefully examining the items in the jewelry box. Aster thought he was going to give it to the king's lover, Yuga. Although these were all beautiful, the perfect item Mio wanted probably didn't exist. Because he loved Yuga, no treasure in this world would shine as brightly as when Yuga wore it. Mio ignored what Aster said and directly bought the shiny moon bracelet from the jewelry box. Aster felt a bit sorry for him on her own. He bought a gift he couldn't give, and it seemed cheap and inferior for Yuga. After browsing the store, Aster drooled over the street food. Although Mio felt helpless, he indulged her and bought it for her. Mio reached out his hand to Aster. Aster naturally placed her hand in his. The two ate skewers while holding hands. Suddenly, Mio realized the fireworks show was about to begin. He led Aster to a perfect spot to watch the fireworks. Actually, he had specially scouted this location during the day. Huge fireworks bloomed in the sky, startling Aster. Mio noticed her fear. He gently reassured her, "The fireworks are far from us. It's safe here." Aster felt his thoughtfulness and smiled happily. Mio asked Aster shyly, "Didn't you want to visit the night market before? How was it?" He looked like he wanted to be praised. Today's experience deeply moved Aster. The novel didn't describe many characters in detail. Whether it was Aster or Mio, their lives were beyond the book. Although this fireworks show wasn't as grand as those in her world, and the close proximity made her afraid. Even so, it made her feel truly alive now. She gave Mio a genuine smile. "I'm very happy." At the same time in the Queen's palace, Klein had been sitting there waiting for Aster for hours. The serious atmosphere made all the maids and servants too afraid to make a sound. The sudden creaking sound of a chair moving startled them all. Klein, who had waited in vain, stood up expressionlessly. He was seething inside. He threw the carefully prepared bouquet on the ground and strode away. He had accidentally worn the clothes of the man he lived with. That day, Aster asked Sir Sayao what to do if she unintentionally stood up a nobleman. Sayao replied, "If you don't have any feelings for that person, then it's their fault. It has nothing to do with you." Aster continued explaining that Count Klein had come, but she was off that day and couldn't meet him. She didn't know how to see him again. Aster remembered. The day she returned from watching the fireworks with Mio, she saw a bunch of daffodils and a letter on the table. She thought it was a challenge letter from someone and was terrified. After some thought, Saya said, "You're the prince's wet nurse. It would be good to formally greet Count Klein, the prince's guardian. Perhaps you could send an invitation." Aster looked at Sayao with admiration. "Teacher, this has been bothering me for so long. You came up with a solution right away. You're a genius." Sir Sayao suddenly grinned. "Then you should write the invitation." Aster immediately turned gloomy and wept, lamenting that she was someone who only scored 20 points in writing, yet had to write an invitation. The next moment, Sir Sayao reminded Aster that there was a Knight's Order emblem on her collar, and she should change clothes. Aster looked down and was shocked. No wonder the clothes felt so big. She angrily shouted at Mio, "I've told you so many times not to mix our clothes." Mio casually retorted, "The room is so small, and besides, who told you not to check properly when you put on clothes?" Sai was at a loss for words. He wondered if they even wanted to hide the fact that they were living together. He looked at Aster, thinking this girl was truly unique. She could even turn a rigid knight into what he was now. Looking at the homework in his hand, he found it strange. Aster didn't know how to spell at all, yet she knew how to write. She didn't know what the characters were, but the order was almost correct. Saya was very interested in this intriguing girl and proposed to visit her room to see what writing tools she had. At this moment, Aster and Mio suddenly realized their living together might be exposed. They instantly reached an agreement. They said the room was too messy and it was improper to visit a lady's private chamber. Sir Saya saw through it but didn't say anything, just smiled lightly. A few days later, Aster received a reply from Klein. How should one live after transmigrating into a maid without the original's memories? Aster had sent an invitation to Klein. The reply said he would come in 2 days. And aside, he's really handsome, just a bit scary. Aster's face had turned ashen. He's not just scary. What if he has a hobby of killing people? If I lied to him, I might be skinned alive. Should I tell him now that I have amnesia? The more Aster thought about it, the dizzier she felt. She was so nervous she felt like throwing up. She lay on the table, staring blankly at the daffodils Klein had brought. He chose to come see me again. It seems the original owner meant a lot to that man. Could I be his ex-girlfriend? What if he notices something's wrong? Will he draw his sword on the spot? Aster had already imagined her fate. She might be taken for a black magician in disguise, or be executed as a spy from another country. Now she had only one thought in her mind. She must survive and return. The next day, Klein came to the Queen's palace, dressed up meticulously. Aster saw he was holding white flowers again. She thought he must like pure women. Aster muttered to herself, there are no such women in the Queen's palace. He should go back quickly. However, the next moment, Klein approached, extended his hand, and invited, how about a walk with me before the prince wakes up? The radiance emanating from his whole body was so dazzling that it was impossible to refuse. After hesitating for a moment, Aster placed her hand in his. Klein was very satisfied with her reaction. He immediately grasped her hand tightly and was about to walk out. Aster felt strange. She should have been panicking, but she felt all her previous worries were unnecessary. Now she wasn't afraid at all. She might regret it later, but at this moment, she just wanted to follow her heart. When they reached the door of the room, Klein suddenly stopped. He glared coldly at Mio behind them. Rivals meeting, eyes red with jealousy. It was like a scene from hell. When they arrived at the courtyard, Aster let go of his hand and kept her distance. "It was you, Count, who saved me that day. I've always wanted to thank you." This formal address left Klein bewildered. "You didn't call me that before." Aster's face darkened. She thought this topic would be the safest, but she had stepped on a landmine so quickly. Now she was in trouble. Can you imagine that she was actually a relic to the male lead? Aster was pulled out by Klein, but her unfamiliar address made him suspect her identity. Aster could only say firmly, "Things are different now from before. Please accept reality." Klein clearly hesitated for a moment. Then he changed the subject. "You haven't answered me. Why are you here?" Aster still didn't know what relationship the original owner had with him. But no matter what, he was a dangerous person. The original owner's life might have included Klein, but one thing was clear. He wasn't part of my life. Aster's words were resolute. "I am the prince's wet nurse. The Count is the prince's guardian. Let the past be the past." However, Klein's expression turned gloomy. "I can't do that. I thought we both valued each other. But it seems that's not the case. Even so, I won't give up." Then, he said something troubling with a red face and sincere expression. "You are now my only precious relic." Hearing the word relic, Aster's eyes widened like copper bells. Her face was full of confusion, doubting her existence. She had considered so many possibilities, but never thought she wouldn't even count as a person. Klein muttered to himself, "You and I are both his relics, the future of remembering him." Aster was unable to accept this. Since coming to this world, she had always fantasized about finding true love. Although she had no expectation for the man in front of her, she never thought she would end up being just an object. Aster wept bitterly. Even taking a huge step back, she had never been married, so how could she be a widow? It was indeed better to stay away from this man. Aster spoke ambiguously. "I miss him too, but now the little prince can't do without me." Klein asked Aster, puzzled, "Is he really that precious to you?" Come to think of it, the prince wasn't her own child. He was just a burden forced upon her one day. When he doesn't drink milk, it's annoying. When he cries and doesn't sleep, she feels like throwing him out. She definitely couldn't like the prince. But when she thinks of the smile he shows her, perhaps one day, he might become precious to her. After some thought, Aster smiled at Klein and firmly said, "I am the prince's wet nurse." Have you ever seen someone so deeply in love? Aster used the little prince as a reason to refuse Klein's request to take her away. Hearing this, Klein pondered for a moment and made a decision. He knelt on one knee and made a heartfelt promise. "That person is now in a country fading into twilight, so I can't give you his vows. But I will use a knight's honor to guarantee you, to protect you and the prince." Aster was puzzled. Why did he have to go to such lengths? She couldn't help but ask, "Can you really protect me?" Klein firmly stated that he had already been to the battlefield for Aster, and he wouldn't hesitate to pay the price of his life. Aster seemed to be somewhat moved. She had never had someone like a knight in her life. Could the man before her really be trusted? Could her precarious transmigration life end at this moment? She wanted to reach out in response, but suddenly withdrew. If she accepted him, wouldn't the original story change? Just as Aster was hesitating, Yuga suddenly appeared from the side. He quickly stepped forward and grasped Klein's hand. "Get up quickly, you'll dirty your white clothes." Klein looked at him with disdain and slapped his hand away. He stood up without saying a word. The current positioning made Aster feel her stress index was off the charts. After all, she couldn't afford to offend either of them. They just talked over Aster. Yuga carefully expressed the king's longing for Klein and invited him to come to his palace to see the king. Klein was speechless. He couldn't stay here for another moment. He ignored Yuga, only briefly, saying goodbye to Aster before leaving. Now Aster was extremely embarrassed. She could imagine how displeased Yuga was. She was too scared to turn around. Sure enough, Yuga's words were full of sarcasm, saying Aster's methods were impressive. Then he pinched Aster's chin, examining her left and right. "You look ordinary, with no personality. You have no charm to speak of. I really don't understand what caught the attention of Klein, Count Kara." Aster was a bit annoyed. This person's words were really unpleasant. How hateful this man was. After Klein left, Yuga leaned in to mock Aster, saying how someone so ordinary could gain Klein's favor. Aster couldn't stand it anymore and retorted, "I'm not ugly either." Yuga looked Aster up and down. "If you were ugly, at least you'd have the value of being ugly. But you seem so ordinary that you have no value at all." Such words, who wouldn't be angry? Yuga, looking at the recent situation, asked, "Count Kara wasn't proposing to you, was he?" Aster was extremely speechless, not wanting to answer, just nodding in response. Yuga was very pleased to have guessed the answer correctly. He smiled and patted Aster's head, like soothing a little dog. Aster knew it was fortunate that he hadn't heard her conversation with Klein just now. But being patted on the head like this was really unpleasant. A few days passed. Aster remembered she should go to the royal library to find some books on early education. The prince's identity was noble, so everything had to be done very carefully. But the king couldn't possibly arrange for another experienced wet nurse to come. Only books could solve the problem. Although Aster asked Sir Mio to borrow books, she was mercilessly refused. Aster needed to get there within an hour. She ran with all her might, constantly cursing Mio in her heart. Didn't he say it was only a 30-minute journey? How could it be so far? She was already panting heavily. She should have exercised more regularly. To shorten the time as much as possible, Aster wanted to take a straight path. He trampled across the lawn and climbed over the railing, but found it extremely high on the other side. Just as he thought he was going to fall badly, he found the sensation unexpectedly soft. He had fallen into Klein's arms. Klein's cheeks flushed red as he stared at Aster and said with a grin, "You almost got hurt." Aster's eyes widened in shock. "Is this the legendary Princess Carrie? Even my dad has never held me like this." Klein seemed a bit embarrassed by the staring. He thoughtfully asked Aster if he was injured. Such close proximity, such a loving gaze, made Aster's heart race. He turned his head away, shyly thanking Klein. Klein was radiating with light. With a bright smile, he asked Aster, "Where are you going? I can carry you there like this." Klein unexpectedly caught Aster, who fell from above, and thoughtfully offered to carry him to the library. This made Aster quite embarrassed. He jumped down from Klein's arms. Patting his clothes, he asked Klein where he was going. Upon learning he was heading to the Queen's palace, Aster instinctively thought he wanted to see Prince Carl, and urged him to hurry as the prince was about to go to sleep. Klein's expression was extremely gentle. He took Aster's hand and said, "Let's meet tomorrow then." Then he placed a kiss on it. This action made Aster's face turn bright red instantly. His just calmed emotions stirred up again. He couldn't help thinking, "Always making my heart flutter. So suddenly my poor heart can't take it." He quickly let go of Klein's hand, turned around, and hastily fled the scene. After Aster's relentless efforts, he finally arrived at the library. He was panting heavily, looking like a creature that had just crawled out from underground, disheveled and desperate. He asked the shocked librarian, "Where are the books on developmental stages?" With the librarian's guidance, Aster finally found in a small corner books about sensory development of 100-day-old babies. But embarrassingly, someone was sound asleep on the desk right below the books. Aster tried to wake him up softly, but there was no response. So Aster decided to quietly take the book out. He carefully attempted to, but due to the distance, he accidentally slipped. The book fell, hitting the sleeping man directly. Aster was so nervous he was sweating profusely. The next second, the man suddenly stretched out his arm and choked Aster's neck. A sinister and terrifying aura, like a messenger from hell. Aster was terrified, thinking he might die like this. He lifted his leg and kicked the man away. Then he started coughing violently. The man seemed to wake up from a deep dream, frantically saying sorry and running away in a flash. Aster, having narrowly escaped, held his aching neck and collapsed weakly on the ground. An intense fear filled his mind. Aster, who had finally borrowed the book and returned to the Queen's palace, had run all the way. It took exactly an hour and a half. He was lying on the chair, panting heavily. Suddenly, Ellie noticed the red marks and bruises on Aster's neck. What's it like to be the group's favorite? Aster complained to the people in the Queen's palace about encountering a pervert in the library. The marks on his neck were from being choked. Instantly, everyone was bustling about, looking for disinfectants and healing medicines. Mio was also very anxious, saying he had scar-removing ointment in his room. Everyone gathered around, asking if he was hurt anywhere else. Seeing everyone so concerned about him, Aster felt warm inside. He thought with a grin, "This is my territory. It's safe here." The maids gave the little prince to Aster and hurriedly went to get medicine. The little prince in his arms also seemed to have a worried look, babbling incomprehensible words. All of this made him feel very gratified. But actually, what Aster wanted most now was to tell his mother that he had encountered a bad person, was hurt, and it was painful. He was very scared that night. Aster looked at the wound on his neck. He asked Mio if there was any medicine to remove bruises. He had heard that knights often get beaten up and have many bruises on their bodies. But Mio was quite boastful. An excellent knight like me doesn't need that kind of medicine. I'll ask Carl tomorrow. Although it felt like self-praise, it was indeed a fact. Mio came from the Royal Guard Knights, a group full of talented individuals. Suddenly, Aster sighed to Mio, I really hope you could marry one of the maids in the Queen's palace, because I think you're the best groom candidate. Mio looked puzzled. Actually, Aster just hoped in his heart that a good man could marry his good sister. Suddenly, Aster remembered Yuga. He felt inexplicably awkward. He needed to quickly brainwash Mio to prevent him from being infatuated with Yuga anymore. The next day, as usual, Aster received a white bouquet from Klein. He complained inwardly, wondering if Klein had taken his advice that one must wear a bouquet when meeting a woman. At this moment, Klein noticed the marks on Aster's neck. He carefully reached out to touch it, full of concern in his eyes as he asked if someone had bullied him. Then he cast a suspicious glance at Mio. Aster answered the question, if someone bullies me, will you avenge me? How heartwarming it is to receive special treatment. Klein was distressed about Aster's injury and wanted to know the identity of the perpetrator, to seek justice for Aster. The maids who saw this scene were all crazily shipping the CP. Suddenly, Aster held Klein's hand and invited him to take a walk in the courtyard. He had considered for a long time. This world was unfamiliar, and not trusting anyone was the safest option. First, pretend to be naive, grit his teeth, and go along with it. When problems arise, find ways to solve them. Perhaps he could even get the information he wanted. Aster stared at Klein and said, I have a secret. I'm only telling you. Can you keep it for me? Klein, being specially treated, seemed very happy. He readily agreed. Aster told Klein that he had lost his memory. Suddenly one day, his memory became blank. He couldn't remember him at all. Although shocked, Klein believed him unconditionally. He only asked how much he had forgotten. Aster said that although he remembered his daily work, he had no memory of Klein or the lady he mentioned. He had to pretend to know Klein earlier because he was scared. Aster spoke while secretly glancing at him. Klein suddenly leaned closer, stroking Aster's face, and softly comforted him. It's okay. Even if you don't remember, you're still very important to me. I see him through you. Even if you don't remember, it doesn't mean the time we three spent together will disappear. Aster, being treated as a substitute, couldn't help but think, if I were the original person, would I be hurt by his words? He hoped the original hadn't fallen in love with this man in front of him. This man who used the sweetest and gentlest tone to say the cruelest words. Early the next morning, Mio grabbed Carl, demanding the bruise-removing ointment, threatening that if he didn't give it, he'd make him use it up in one day. Carl looked pitiful. This was his stockpiled necessity, but Mio snatched it away. Aster hadn't slept all night and was completely out of it. So when Mio brought the ointment and explained how to use it, he seemed not to understand. Mio had no choice but to go the extra mile and apply the medicine for him personally. At this time, Circea also just noticed the wound on Aster's neck. After learning what had happened, he knelt on one knee, held Aster's hand, and comforted him. You must have been very scared. Is that why you couldn't sleep well? Has that person been caught? Aster came to his senses and thanked Teacher Sia for his concern with a bright smile. He recalled yesterday's events. If he hadn't seen wrong, that man should be the Grand Magician Hill. Aster was attacked by Grand Magician Hill in the library. He decided to take the initiative to investigate what kind of trauma Hill had suffered on the battlefield. According to the description in the escape record, he had lived in the Magician's Tower since childhood. Like a flower in a greenhouse, he was cultivated to become a great magician. He had just left the greenhouse when he was sent to the battlefield. Although the book didn't record what he experienced after that, he developed severe post-traumatic stress disorder. Later, it was Yuga who helped him out of the shadows. Simply put, his existence was only to showcase Yuga's personal charm. In the original work, apart from describing Yuga's love story with the king, there was hardly any description of other characters. So now Aster needed to gather more information. But even Klein, who went to the battlefield with him, didn't know what had happened. Aster wanted to take the initiative to uncover the truth. He secretly came to the royal library. As expected, Hill was hiding in the corner sleeping. His delicate features were dazzling even when asleep. Aster picked up a book and started a long-range attack. The keen Hill suddenly opened his eyes. His magic shattered the book instantly. He angrily questioned what Aster was doing. Although Aster was a bit scared, he unwrapped the bandage on his neck, revealing the bruise. Hill instinctively seemed a bit flustered, but quickly feigned indifference, as if it was nothing unusual. Seeing Aster's firm attitude, demanding an explanation, Hill reached out and pressed his finger on Aster's neck. After a flash of light, all the bruises disappeared. Although it wasn't my intention, I'm sorry for hurting you. Then, Aster rambled on, inadvertently mentioning his feelings at that time. I was very scared and in pain then. You were planning to kill me, weren't you? Hearing this, Hill's heart skipped a beat. He then staggered back a step, covering his face and trembling all over. He muttered to himself, I shouldn't hurt others. This time, Aster roughly understood the reason for his condition. Hill covered his face in extreme pain, promising to make amends. But he left hurriedly, without even asking for Aster's name or identity. From that day on, Aster went to the library every day, but never saw him again. But he must still be in the palace, because this is where he met Yuga and later became Yuga's fervent follower. Aster regretted not reading that part more carefully. The next day, while Aster was exercising with the little prince, Countess Kaki arrived. This man showed you what it means to be thick-skinned. The queen's sister, Countess Kaki, came to visit the little prince only 3 months after his birth. Aster saw the countess in formal attire, looking as serious as a host. He leaned forward, carefully examining the little prince with a thoughtful expression. He said what no one else dared to say, this appearance doesn't resemble either of you at all. He cautiously reached out, wanting to touch the little prince. And the prince, meeting this aunt for the first time, seemed to like her very much, smiling and grasping her hand. The atmosphere was quite lovely. Just then, the uninvited guest Yuga arrived again. The two greeted each other very casually. The countess hurriedly wanted to leave. The thick-skinned Yuga, completely oblivious, even asked if he was interrupting. The countess didn't want to respond at all and didn't stop walking. Yuga called out to her. The prince would be happy to see his aunt. Please come visit him often in the future. Hearing this, the countess only turned her head to look once and left directly without giving any answer. Yuga didn't feel awkward at all. He turned and happily started playing with the little prince, expressing his desire to breastfeed him. The maids behind were extremely disgusted. Seeing this, Aster could only dissuade him, saying the little prince had just finished feeding and was very full now. Yuga looked helpless and said, then I'll come back next time. A few days later, after Aster's tireless efforts, he finally discovered the sleeping Grand Magician on a lawn. He had a mischievous smile on his face. He picked up a stone and threw it. It hit Hill squarely. He cried out in pain, clutching his buttocks. As he got up, he saw Aster pretending to be busy nearby and became very angry. He stood up abruptly and roared, "How is it you again?" Seeing his painfully stinging buttocks, Aster felt a bit guilty. But he could only change the subject. You said you would compensate me, but there's been no news, so I had to come find you. Hill sighed helplessly. Fine. How much money do you want as compensation? Aster deliberately acted coy. How much can you give me? How much do you think I'm worth? Seeing his disgusted expression, Aster felt his life was in danger and hurriedly said he was just joking. But he hoped for a favor. I hope you can leave the palace. The Grand Magician turned out to have such an adorable character setting. Aster hoped the Grand Magician could leave the palace, but his expression was clearly one of refusal. Aster couldn't understand. He could clearly return to his domain, so why insist on staying in the palace? Hill curled up, assuming a defensive posture. This place is the safest. There are other magic knights here, and Count Kara. This made Aster even more confused. First, nothing should be able to threaten a Grand Magician. Secondly, the magicians in this world were set to have free spirits and dislike being constrained. The palace was also under ancient magic, which would place many restrictions on magicians, so they shouldn't like staying in the palace. But Hill was quite pretentious. I'm the Grand Magician. No place or person can be an obstacle to me. Hearing this, Aster made a hypothesis. If you and Count Kara fought, who would win? Hill was very confident. If I'm fully conscious, of course I would win. Aster thought to himself, he really does have mental issues. Not wanting to argue further, he said, anyway, this is my request. I've earned quite a bit, so don't think you can just pay me off. Hill was very confused. Why do you insist on making me leave? Aster couldn't reveal his intention to change the original story. He could only lie, saying he didn't want to be choked again when passing by certain places. Then he launched into a barrage of criticism. Hill became very flustered and retorted, I'm not an assassin. I've only been in the library for so long, and it's just you, another maid, and 2 librarians. Aster exclaimed, so you're a habitual offender. Hill felt very dejected. He sighed helplessly, although I don't think it's good to tell you this. Honestly, I can only sleep well in the library. Ever since I went to the battlefield, I haven't been able to sleep. As soon as I lie down, I think of the eerie screams and towering flames, and the hundreds of people dying before my eyes. I keep having that nightmare over and over. Again and again, I dream of returning to that place. It seems Hill's post-traumatic stress disorder included insomnia. It's unclear how Yuga helped him alleviate it. Looking like he was about to die, Aster couldn't bring himself to drive him away. He suddenly had a bold idea, as if he had made a big decision, to look after the magician. That night, Aster brought the Grand Magician back to his own room, starting their cohabitation. To alleviate Hill's insomnia, Aster brought him back to his own room. Mio refused to let Hill stay here. If word got out, Aster's reputation would be ruined. But Aster couldn't leave him alone. Moreover, since experiencing the war, Hill had developed neurasthenia. He might have extreme reactions while sleeping. It would be dangerous for the prince to be near him. So Aster's arrangement was for Mio to sleep with him. Hearing this, Mio became completely dejected, sighing constantly. In contrast, Hill was very happy, saying he could sleep with anyone. Aster gave him a look, signaling him to shut up. He then turned to Mio with a pitiful look. People can go crazy if they can't sleep. Let's create a safe, upright, and beautiful world together. Actually, Aster knew Mio was shy, so he made this decision. His conscience was aching, seeing them unable to decide. Hill showed an innocent smile and said to Aster, if you feel uncomfortable, let the night sleep alone. You can sleep next to me if you want. Hearing this, Mio became anxious and quickly agreed. But he warned, if you choke me, I'll pry open your head with a knife. Don't blame me then. Aster, standing nearby, had a bad feeling. Even if Hill didn't choke him, he might still get hit on the head. And so, the 4 of them began their cohabitation. Hill also managed to sleep outside the library for once. A few days passed, and rumors of a ghost haunting the queen's palace emerged. It was said that after midnight, a ghost in white clothing would appear. Aster felt strangely familiar. It seemed that in any world, ghosts wear white clothes. They said it walked back and forth in the hallway, muttering, where is it, while searching for something. When Ellie asked what exactly it was looking for, Anna went into storytelling mode. Of course, it's looking for the person who killed it. Once found, it will surely use its fingernails to choke the person, then drag away the corpse. The 3 listened with great interest. Sir Cress, standing nearby, let out a dry cough to interrupt them. Looking terrified, he said, it doesn't seem appropriate for ladies to discuss such things. As expected, he was teased by the 3. You're not afraid of ghosts, are you? Just hearing the word ghost made him jump, but he still denied it, insisting he wasn't scared at all. That night, Aster asked Hill if ghosts really existed. There were rumors of a ghost in the queen's palace. Aster asked Hill if ghosts really existed. He thought Hill would be the most knowledgeable about ghosts. Hill looked indifferent. He thought it was more likely to be a maid in a white nightgown than a ghost. Although he couldn't absolutely say ghosts don't exist, he hadn't sensed that kind of power here. Hearing that ghosts might exist, Aster screamed in fear. As a modern person, he couldn't accept the concept of ghosts at all. Hill seemed used to his outbursts and ignored him, turning to ask Mio if he was going to sleep in the same bed with him again. Mio reminded him that it was originally his bed. As expected, the 2 started arguing again. They had been living together for just over a week, but they fought every day. Although Hill's condition had improved, he would occasionally wake up screaming and attack Mio beside him. The next morning, he would use healing magic on him. This cycle repeated for several days. Aster thought Hill would go back soon, but he particularly liked the prince, and the prince liked him too. When holding the prince, his expression of happiness was very similar to Yuga's. Aster couldn't help thinking, the person who should love the prince doesn't, while someone unrelated dotes on him so much. Is this his fortune or misfortune? Watching the two argue endlessly over the bed, Aster separated them. As the owner of the room, I have a good suggestion. Grand Magician, why don't you return to your domain and continue your previous research? Hearing this, Hill instantly turned ice cold. Aster quickly changed his mind. Although that would be good, your insomnia hasn't been cured yet. Your health is our happiness. Then he quickly pushed them both onto the bed to rest, turned off the lights, and went to sleep. He believed that the more cowardly you are, the longer you live. That night, Aster, unable to sleep soundly, got up to get a glass of water. As soon as he opened the door, he encountered the female ghost the maids had been talking about. It was clear that everyone's guesses were incorrect. Aster approached to bow to the queen and offered to escort her back to her chambers, but was refused. She said she was looking for something, but didn't know where it was. When Aster asked what she was looking for, the queen laughed for the first time. The queen had been searching for something, yet she didn't even know what it was. Aster thoughtfully offered to accompany the queen on her walk until she remembered. As the two were about to leave, the queen suddenly stopped. She turned to Sir Alex behind her and said, "There's no need." Alex seemed a bit flustered. "What if there's danger?" The queen interrupted him. "If there's real danger, you won't be able to help me anyway." Ever since he fell in love with Yuga, the queen no longer opened her heart to him. Aster never thought he'd witness a scene straight out of The Escape. The queen's palace was dim, silent, and desolate in the night. But it wasn't unpleasant. The two arrived at an abandoned room. With a creaking sound, the door to the storage room opened. The queen clearly touched a hidden mechanism in the darkness. Aster was amazed. There was actually a hidden chamber here. They climbed up a dark spiral staircase. There was yet another door here. All of the queen's actions and expressions were very natural. Logically, she had just moved to this palace and shouldn't know about these hidden places. This was just a small attic. The queen casually searched through things, but she still couldn't remember what she was looking for. Depression eats away at the soul. She didn't even have the energy to think now. It was truly pitiful. Among the readers of The Escape, many sympathized with the queen. At this moment, Aster couldn't help but ponder. If someone more useful than himself had come here, perhaps they could have changed the queen's tragic life. But reality is often cruel. There are no what-ifs. Aster decided to do what he could. He cheerfully said to the queen, "How about we play a treasure hunt game? Let's find things you think are interesting here. Maybe as we search, you'll remember." The queen nodded with interest. Under the faint candlelight, Aster began a joyful exploration mode. His cheerful personality even infected the queen a bit. The queen who lost her child, and the prince's nanny who couldn't find her way home. Even though they weren't friends, Aster suddenly felt like he was in his own world, having a pajama party with friends. Time passed, and the candle burned halfway down. But there seemed to be only miscellaneous items here, nothing of value. The queen remembered she was looking for something deeper in the basement, but she didn't know where the entrance was. At this moment, it brightened outside the window. The queen quickly stood up. Her complex expression was extremely painful. It was dawn. People from different worlds and classes can become friends. Aster accompanied the queen all night. Until dawn, they found nothing. Then he escorted the queen back to her chambers. When he entered his own room, he suddenly remembered the little prince in bed. Fortunately, he was sleeping soundly. Aster finally felt relieved. He sat down gently, tiptoed into the blanket, careful not to wake the little prince. As he gently patted the prince to soothe him, he thought the queen was likely depressed. When people encounter misfortune and become depressed, they might forget everything they don't want to remember. But Aster hoped that what the queen was persistently searching for was the little prince, even though he might be the cause of her depression. After staying up all night, Aster fell into a deep sleep holding the prince. Early the next morning, Sir Cress knocked on Aster's door to wake him up. After a series of clanging sounds from inside the room, Aster came out wrapped in just a bath towel. This action stunned Cress. This was because Mio and Hill were sleeping inside, so Aster couldn't change clothes. Moreover, the only shawl had been soiled by the little prince's spit-up milk. If he came out directly in his nightwear, it would make Sir Cress even more confused. So Aster had no choice but to do this. It was truly embarrassing. He didn't expect last night's stroll to have such serious consequences. Aster asked Cress if there were any floor plans of the queen's palace. He could only claim that in case of fire or earthquake, they could escape quickly. Cress smiled awkwardly. You should have confidence in the knights around you. Astor was very firm, believing that one must rely on oneself to survive. Cress reluctantly agreed to do his best to help find them, but since it involved the queen's safety, he might not be able to find them. After class, Astor said goodbye to teacher Cress. As he turned around, he was startled by Hill standing at the door. He hurriedly pushed Hill into the room. It would be terrible if others saw him. But Hill kept talking. He kept rambling. I might as well teach you myself. Stop learning. You're affecting my sleep. And when I wanted to go out, Sir Mio stopped me. Astor stared at Mio, deeply moved. He thought he was sleeping, but it turned out he was engaging in a silent battle. However, the taciturn Mio didn't receive any of the information Astor was trying to convey. Astor took the little prince from Mio's arms and asked Hill, can you get the floor plans of the queen's palace? I want to know where the basement is. Faced with Hill's inquiry, Astor said, I just feel like the ghost of the queen's palace is in the basement. Hearing this, a strange look flashed in Mio's eyes. Astor wanted to help the queen. He asked Hill about the location of the basement in the queen's palace. But Hill said, even with the floor plans, you can't go there. I sense magic permeating the basement. You need magic to enter and exit. Then he left without saying much more. That night, Astor was asking Mio about Hill's whereabouts during the day. Suddenly, Hill jumped out, scaring Astor half to death. He said with a bright smile, I want to try sleeping outside. Obviously, his target was the little prince. But he was met with a unanimous refusal from Astor and Mio. In the middle of the night, while Astor was sleeping, he dreamed of hearing the queen calling his name repeatedly. In a daze, he stumbled to the door. As he opened it, he was startled by the queen who had been waiting for a long time. She stepped forward and put a matching shawl she had specially prepared on Astor. The soft touch made Astor feel like flowers were blooming on his back. He said to the queen, I might not have come out. You might have brought this for nothing. But the queen looked sad and said, I was thinking it would be nice if you were here tonight. I kept thinking that. After saying this, the queen smiled, which was rare. It was the first time in Astor's life he had heard such words. This feeling of being needed and expected warmed his heart. As they were about to leave, Sir Alex followed closely behind. The queen still refused his company and turned away resolutely. Astor, having read the original story, knew well. Alex's concern for the queen was genuine, because in his memory, it had always been the queen. He remembered the queen's smile from when she was young, afraid she might catch a cold, afraid she might prick her hand while admiring flowers, always taking care of her meticulously. He even now guarded against a fragile maid. All his concern was genuine. How could someone who truly loved the queen fall in love with Yuga? It was incomprehensible. The two arrived at the former reception room. Back then, the king had those who disrespected Yuga arrested. Now, due to lack of staff, it had been abandoned. The queen thoughtfully found a pair of shoes for Astor. Astor suddenly became curious and asked the queen if she had ever been afraid of marriage. No one had ever asked such a question before. The queen and the king were engaged when she was 17. She was young then and didn't understand anything. She just found it incredible that they gave her such an honorable position when she still had an older sister. Astor remembered that the queen's sister married into another country not long after her younger sister's engagement. She was said to be a person with strong character. The queen was engaged to the king at 17. At 21, the whole country knew the king loved Yuga. She only entered the palace and became queen at 24. She should have had many thoughts during those 3 years, but now she couldn't remember anything clearly. And what's truly frightening is not knowing anything at all. In this country, everyone was supporting the love between the king and Yuga. Whether intentionally or not, the queen's existence was gradually being forgotten. Astor told her about the real basement, which required magic to enter. The queen started mumbling, so that's how it is. The nanny was a magician. It seems you can't take me to the basement. Neither you nor I can. The queen said this with utter despair. From this moment on, Astor knew what he had to do. Those who don't work don't deserve to eat. It was time for Hill to repay his debt. Astor crouched by the bed, carefully examining the sleeping Mio, thinking how handsome this man was even while sleeping. Normally, he was sensitive to sounds and should have woken up already. It seemed Hill had put too much pressure on him. As he was thinking, Mio softly called out, Astor, you're going to stare a hole through my face. Astor purposefully replied, quite naturally, then get up. Then Astor stared at Hill, sending out I-beam waves. But Hill just turned over, falling into an even deeper sleep. Mio saw Astor's intention and asked if he should wake him up. After receiving an affirmative answer, he directly clapped loudly right next to Hill's ear. The loud noise almost burst Aster's eardrums. Hill was naturally startled awake. He was stunned for a moment, then, realizing the situation, he felt like killing Mio. He gritted his teeth and grabbed Mio's collar, about to act, when Aster called out to stop him. "Let's make a deal." Hill was sick and needed to hear someone's breathing to fall asleep peacefully. The most effective was the little prince's carefree breathing. Sleeping Hill was dangerous, so he had always been forbidden from approaching the little prince. Aster's proposed deal was to let the prince sleep next to Hill until he fell asleep. In exchange, Hill would take him to the basement of the queen's palace. Hearing this, Hill was overjoyed. He agreed at light speed and took out a magic shard. With this, one could move twice. But the number of uses couldn't be increased, because Aster's magical talent was almost zero. Hill gave Aster a magic gem that allowed 2 movements. Aster wanted to see if it was real. He was about to bite it when Hill hurriedly stopped him, because there were traces of black magic inside. Aster was a bit surprised. So black magic really existed. Could it be that the queen's nanny was really a black magician, as the king said? Hill explained that black magicians weren't accepted by others and were strongly rejected by this world, but he still respected them. A magician's quality and talent were determined from birth, but black magicians were people who made a choice. Originally unable to use magic, they experienced miracles due to very sincere reasons. Hearing this, Aster couldn't help but ask if he could become a black magician. But Hill said Aster had no sincere hatred or desire, so there was no possibility. Moreover, black magic required corroding one's own soul and not even being seen as human by others. Aster deflated like a balloon and slumped on the table. His desire was just to go back home and sleep next to his mother. Even magic probably couldn't achieve that. Hill reminded him again, "Although I don't know why you want to go to the basement. Remember, you only have 2 chances." The next morning, the queen's sister, Countess Kajai, came again. She had been coming frequently lately, but the 2 sisters didn't seem close. After pouring tea, she sat silently with a gloomy expression for a while before leaving. Occasionally, she would say something like, "Let me have a child." It was really perplexing. How could the queen help her with such a thing? At noon, while Aster was resting, Ellie rushed in urgently. "You need to get dressed quickly. Count Kara is coming." Anna beside her was also very excited. They hurriedly pushed Aster to go get dressed up. It must be said that Klein was very popular. The 2 dragged Aster to the room's doorway. Aster quickly blocked it because there were traces of men inside. Mio was very careful, but Hill treated it like his own room, faced with their terrifying, confused expressions. Aster could only lie, saying that when he opened the room, Klein had just arrived, so it wasn't good. This explanation was easy to accept because in the previous life, Mina had said that Aster's room was messy. Just then Klein arrived. He came to see Aster, still holding a bunch of white flowers, dressed dashingly handsome. The 2 sat together on chairs in the courtyard, not saying a word. Aster occasionally stole glances at him, feeling extremely awkward inside. He had told him he had lost his memory, not expecting it to turn out like this. No matter how he asked, Klein wouldn't say anything about that girl. Could it be that he wanted Aster to remember on his own? Klein stared at Aster, smiling as he said, "You tie your hair up now. You used to always wear it down. You seem to think it looked better that way." Aster understood his expression. It was as if he was reminiscing about something through him. In fact, they both had a lot to say to each other, but still couldn't find a way to converse, so the conversation couldn't continue. Aster wanted to ask if the pin was from him, but the words caught in his throat. He stood up, indicating he had to leave first. Klein's expression turned disappointed, but then he graciously agreed. That night, Aster fulfilled the deal, letting Hill sleep next to the little prince. His sleeping face was as peaceful as a prince's, meaning he was slowly being healed, but there was still some uncertainty. Handing the prince over to the not-quite-normal Hill now made Aster feel a bit guilty. He didn't actually like children, but this was work, so he wanted to do his best at everything he could. Just then, Mio opened the door. He came in, and Aster apologized for Hill's situation. But Mio said if he felt sorry, then don't bring others back anymore. But what you say often comes true. He walked into the room, and stared at Aster for a very long time. It seemed like he wanted to say something, but in the end, he just sighed softly and said, "Sleep well." Aster didn't ask further. He extinguished the oil lamp, and they bid each other good night. Late at night, the three in the room were all sleeping soundly. Only Aster was sleepless. He looked at the night outside the window, thinking. The door halfway through sleep, he didn't know what time it was. And when did the queen start wandering in the empty corridors? Aster carefully got out of bed, lit an oil lamp, put on a shawl, and went out to look for the queen. Tonight seemed particularly dark. Alex suddenly appeared, gesturing to Aster to go to the balcony. Aster's hand paused on the balcony door for a moment. If this life was in a game, would this moment be a crossroads in life? As the sound of branches opening the door rang out, the queen's sorrowfully beautiful figure appeared in the moonlight. What is a sense of tacit understanding? The queen knew it was Aster without turning around. She asked, "Do you know the feeling of waiting for night to come every day?" Aster could also relate to the feeling of not wanting morning to come. Then the two shared a knowing smile. Aster gave a shawl to the thinly clad queen, hoping she wouldn't catch cold. The queen felt a warmth and sincerely praised Aster's kindness. But Aster felt he didn't deserve to be called kind. If he were truly kind, he would have fallen for the prince he spent day and night with. And he wouldn't have told Klein he had amnesia. And he would have taken more active steps to help the pitiful queen. He believed his current actions were just some insignificant sympathy. Aster learned that the queen had been suffering from insomnia every night since the wet nurse's death, over 2 months ago. Aster hoped he could help her find what she had forgotten to ease her insomnia. Aster reached out his hand and told the queen, "I've found a way to the basement." Hearing this, the queen was overjoyed, as if basking in spring sunshine. She gripped Aster's hand tightly. "Then we can find the treasure today." Aster reminded the queen to be careful, because it was very dark down there. But the queen revealed a secret to Aster. Long ago, she had lived in darkness where she couldn't see her own feet. What tragic experiences the queen had endured, no one but herself knew. Clearly, the queen was unfortunate, as were Mio, frustrated by unrequited love, and Hill, the great magician who had to go to war. Prince Carl, who grew up not knowing his birth mother's face, and countless others, all had their own misfortunes. The only ones who could sleep peacefully in this palace were the king and Yuga. Everyone praises the beauty of love, but why have all the people here become unfortunate because of it? Aster led the queen to the attic from last time. She took out the gem she was carrying. He reached out and embraced the queen, and as Hill had said, he tried hard to imagine the basement. Suddenly, the gem emitted a dazzling light. The space before their eyes became distorted. With a whoosh, the two appeared in the basement. Aster looked around. There wasn't a single window here, yet it was surprisingly bright. He accidentally took a step forward. The ground emitted a buzzing sound and a huge light, startling Aster. When he came to his senses, he felt something was even more wrong. This on the ground seemed to be blood. Aster had brought the queen to the basement, only to find the floor covered in blood. He trembled with fear. He had been in this world for over 100 days, always feeling things weren't good. But upon seeing this magic circle made of blood, he realized his life had been quite comfortable. Just then, the queen beside him muttered to herself, "This is the place." She walked to the magic circle and crouched down. Her touch immediately made the entire circle light up. She and the wet nurse had drawn this. She had started it, but the wet nurse later modified it. Aster asked who she was, but the queen didn't answer. She pointed to the bed in the magic circle. "I'm here." "He's there. And on the other side are the wet nurse and him." Aster inquired about the purpose of this magic circle. The queen still didn't answer directly, instead recounting the past. It turned out that since the queen's marriage, the wet nurse had worried about her inability to conceive. She would often say, "A queen without power, if she can't even produce an heir, surely has no future." The queen looked at Aster, her face filled with sorrow. "What else could I do? In this world, what should I do?" Aster couldn't offer a specific solution. He could only comfort the queen. "Just like you've always tried, continue to live on." The queen's expression was melancholic. She paused for a moment. She continued to recount the past to Aster. The wet nurse hated the king and Yuga. Because they were unkind to the queen, the wet nurse had spoken of revenge against them. The queen slowly walked into the magic circle. Although King Aegis loved Yuga very much, she needed an heir. and the queen's family, who cared nothing for her, also hoped she could give birth to an heir. Hearing this, Aster had already understood much. Then the queen said, "This is a magic circle that can make people pregnant." Aster was shocked. He instinctively fled at lightning speed, hugging a nearby pillar, shouting, "I think I just stepped on it. I'm not ready to have a child on my own." But in fact, not just anyone could get pregnant. When he heard that the magic circle needed to be drawn with the blood of two people who wanted to have a child, Aster was shocked. Such a large magic circle, using only two people's blood, wouldn't that drain them completely? The queen continued to explain. Two people stand in the middle of the magic circle, perform the ritual, and pregnancy can occur. It must be said, this was truly a groundbreaking infertility treatment. If the wet nurse went to modern times, she could definitely make a fortune. Since then, the queen had always thought her experience was a dream. Only now, coming here, did she realize it was all real. She stroked the bed in the middle of the magic circle, saying, "You asked me before if I was scared when I got married. Actually, I don't love him. I never have." The queen didn't love the king. Even though she let herself become a laughingstock, she felt a bit angry inside. But actually, it didn't matter. The queen showed a relieved smile, but it made one's heart ache. Aster was glad the queen thought this way. When he had watched The Outcast, he had always thought the queen endured so much humiliation because of her intense love for the king. It was better that she didn't care because she didn't love him. After composing themselves, they began to search for treasure in this place. But before long, Aster regretted making this decision. There was an eerie, horrifying atmosphere everywhere. Bloodstained blades, and various black magic potions. It suddenly changed from discussing life to a horror film. Suddenly, the queen appeared from beside him. She took out a pocket watch from a box nearby. When opened, it revealed a portrait that looked exactly like Prince Carl. The queen seemed to remember something, her eyes darkening. She said she had found what she had forgotten. She then gave the pocket watch to Aster. With a complex expression, she said something incomprehensible. "Now it's time to sleep again." After returning from the basement, Aster never saw the queen again. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, Aster waited alone with an oil lamp, expecting that figure. But from behind, Sir Alex's hesitant voice came, "It's better to sleep at night." Aster returned to his room. Hill suddenly jumped out from the side, startling Aster. It turned out the prince had woken up in the middle of the night, and not seeing Aster, had been crying. Mio had taken a long time to soothe him back to sleep. Hill was complaining on the side that Sir Mio was terrible at comforting children. Aster took the little prince, apologizing to both of them, saying he wouldn't go out anymore. The next morning, Aster carefully examined the pocket watch. It felt at least 100 years old. After inquiring with Circea, he learned that the name written inside was Hal Quadelin. Yuga's surname was also Quadelin. Could it be a coincidence? But the portrait inside seemed to resemble both Little Wong and Yuga. Could Carl Quadelin be Yuga's ancestor? But why would this item be in the basement of the queen's palace? Aster recalled what the queen had said. The two men in the basement that day should have been the king and Yuga. Why were there 4 of them, whose blood was used for the magic circle? What exactly was the wet nurse's revenge? Aster's mind was in chaos, unable to understand anything. He suddenly remembered something and asked Hill behind him. The basement was full of mysteries. Aster suddenly thought of something and asked Hill, who was playing with a child nearby. Black magicians can't be identified if they don't use magic. But if they are fellow magicians, they know each other's identities. The king and Yuga were not magicians. Just then, Mina's urgent knocking came from the door. Aster stood up abruptly. He quickly picked up the little prince and told Hill to find a place to hide. He left behind an unhappy Hill, hurriedly running to the door. Mina excitedly said that Count Caleb was coming this way. Aster was exasperated, thinking not again. Hearing the noise, Anna came running over. With a bright smile, she said, "He promised to introduce his deputy to me." Then he took the little prince away with a blissful expression, muttering to himself, "At least it's above the rank of Baron now." Hearing this, Ellie rushed out of the room, shouting something like, "That's what he told me too." Aster was shocked. When did this man start making promises to everyone? Why didn't he introduce me to this first? Everyone was discussing heatedly. The sound of a door opening was heard. Today, Caleb was as dazzling as ever. He called out to Aster affectionately, and smiling, he presented Aster with today's white bouquet. He turned his head to greet Ellie and Anna, asking them to wait for a moment. Then he pushed open the door behind him. Deputy officers Vinson and Gibbs came out and saluted. Aster marveled. So Caleb's position allowed him to have 2 deputies. He hadn't lied. Aster sized up the 2 men. They were clearly mature gentlemen with taste and discretion, completely different from the young, chattering guards of the queen. Aster couldn't help but be impressed. It was obvious that Ellie and Anna were very satisfied with the two men, easily captivated by male charm. They allowed Caleb to take Aster away for as long as he wanted. Aster, suddenly sold out, was panicking. Suddenly, Caleb picked him up from behind and headed straight out of the queen's palace. All the maids were astonished, their eyes wide as saucers. Aster felt extremely embarrassed. Dear audience, thanks to me, you've witnessed something quite extraordinary. Pepe quickly stepped forward to help open the door. She even gave Aster a big thumbs up from behind, as if cheering for his victory. The two arrived at the courtyard. Seeing Caleb's horse, Aster exclaimed inwardly, "This horse looks exactly like its owner." Caleb lifted Aster onto the horse's back in one swift motion. Then he mounted and rode off at full speed. Riding a horse for the first time, Aster was so scared his heart was about to fly out. The steed passed by the training ground. Aster immediately spotted Mio, who was training. Caleb forcibly took Aster away on horseback, but they encountered Mio on the way. The consciousness of being a working person made Aster constantly explain in his mind that he wasn't intentionally skipping work. After a bumpy ride, Aster imagined that they had finally arrived at Caleb's place of memories, as beautiful as a paradise. However, the reality was that they stopped in front of a suspension bridge on a cliff edge. Aster, shocked, pointed to the other side and said, "How can there be a house on the edge of a cliff?" Its eerie appearance was just like Dracula's castle. Caleb smiled brightly. "You've said something like this before." Aster hadn't expected that the original owner not only had a similar personality to his, but also possessed a modern sense of humor. Just as they were about to cross, the white horse accidentally stepped on a crumbling stone wall. It became frightened and refused to go on. The two had no choice but to walk up. Aster trembled as he went first. Caleb reached out his hand and promised, "Even if I have to put down my sword, I won't let go of your hand." It must be said, every sentence was extremely romantic, because for a knight to say he'd put down his sword was equivalent to being willing to give up his life. Aster placed his hand in Caleb's palm. "If I fall, you'll save me, right?" Caleb, blushing, gripped Aster's hand tightly, reassuring him, "As long as I'm here, you won't die before me. Even if I'm covered in wounds, I'll protect you completely." They finally reached the house. Sunlight filled the entire courtyard. Unexpectedly, up close, it had such a cozy feeling. This was where the original owner and that person had lived. Aster inexplicably felt that the people who once lived here were very happy. But for him, it was a strange place. Although the original owner looked exactly like him, they were different people. This body didn't have the ear piercing he had gotten to commemorate his 20th birthday. Unlike me, he wouldn't immediately cut his hair when it grew long. Even his hair quality was better than mine. I had hoped that coming here with Caleb would restore the original owner's memories, to know what I needed to conceal, so I wouldn't have to be so nervous anymore. Unfortunately, this body had no reaction at all. What happened to the original owner's soul? How long did they live here? After entering this house, would I finally be able to understand their relationship? What did this man really think of the female lead? On one hand, reminiscing about the past. On the other, confessing to the female lead. Aster finally arrived at the place Caleb had mentioned, where he used to live. The two entered the house. Reportedly, he had a weak constitution and needed long-term care. Located on a steep cliff, the air here was excellent. But looking at the height, Aster felt a bit weak in the knees. He thought to himself, at least it's clear he doesn't have a weak heart. Suddenly, Aster remembered the white bouquet in his hand and wanted to find a place to put it. Caleb very skillfully took out a vase from a cabinet. At this moment, Aster spoke up and asked, "You never told me before what kind of person that lady was. Was it because you wanted to tell me here?" Caleb, with a blissful expression, said, "I fell in love with him the moment I saw him. He's the most beautiful person I've ever seen in my life. It's as if the sun rises just to see him. Flowers bloom just to praise her." Aster sighed, thinking she must have been truly beautiful. Caleb, like a lovesick fool, went on endlessly. "She's not just beautiful on the outside. Even her shadow and breath are. She's a work of art carefully crafted by God." Aster let it go in one ear, and out the other, once again praying that the original owner hadn't fallen in love with him. Aster said calmly, "You really loved him, didn't you?" But Caleb stared at Aster with a smile, saying something that could be misunderstood, "You're the same." Aster was momentarily dazed, but after thinking about it, he felt that Caleb probably meant the original owner loved him too. When Caleb spoke of his deceased lover, it was as if they were still by his side. How deep must his love be like this? According to Caleb's description, that girl treated Aster like her own little sister, as if cherishing her other half. Caleb was about to go to war, so he brought Aster to revisit this place before his departure. Unexpectedly, there was going to be another war. This country had never become a battlefield, so people in the capital enjoyed peace. But wars never ceased outside the country. Those small countries without heroes like Caleb could only become vassal states or perish. At this moment, Aster was very grateful that he hadn't been reborn in such a country, or in this world's unique vampire kingdom. Caleb would leave within a month. This time he was going to a small country called Rohai. Aster wasn't sure where that was either. The military preparations during this period would be very busy. But Caleb kissed Aster's fingertips, saying gently, "No matter how busy I am, I always have time for you." Why was he constantly speaking in riddles in this place? Faced with this man's sweet words, Aster's heart couldn't help but skip a beat. He hurriedly withdrew his hand and changed the subject. "Is it because you only have time today that you brought me here?" In fact, Caleb hoped that by coming here, Aster would regain his memories. He looked around and said, "You used to like it here too. I wanted to see you happy." Caleb looked at Aster with a radiant smile. "I hope you can be happy forever. I hope even more that I'm the one who brings you that happiness." Without the original owner's memories, Aster still felt only unfamiliarity with this place. But apparently, the original owner and that person seemed to be at their happiest and most natural here. Aster hoped to find a diary or other traces here, so he could understand that person better. Aster asked where his room was, but Caleb turned red, embarrassedly turning his head away, saying it's not polite to enter a girl's room casually. But when asked about that person's room, Caleb took Aster's hand and led the way. Aster couldn't help but think sarcastically. He doesn't know where Aster's room is, but he knows where the lady's is. They arrived at the room. The furnishings were simple, yet elegant. Aster searched through the cabinets, but apart from dust, there was nothing else. Caleb muttered that when he left, that person had burned everything. When Aster asked who that person was, Caleb just smiled without saying anything. Aster discovered another staircase outside. It seemed to be an attic. The furnishings inside looked like the original owner's room. Aster asked if there was anything left behind. Caleb continued to speak in riddles. "If it were that person, would you burn your things?" Aster's fists clenched in frustration. So who exactly was that person? He always stopped short at crucial points. Aster continued to ask, "Was I his maid before?" Caleb calmly replied that although called a maid, only the two of them lived in this house. It was more like being a companion who could talk. To Aster, this sounded like someone talking without considering the consequences. Such a large house, and the original owner did all the housework alone. Just thinking about cleaning made him want to cry. Aster once again expressed his desire to know more about him, especially since Caleb was about to leave. And so the story began to unfold. The first time he saw him, Caleb wished he were a poet. That way, he could express his feelings more delicately. His name was Edie. Caleb emotionally told Aster the story of himself and his moonlight love. His name was Edie. He had eyes as clear as the ocean, a fragile and kind beauty. He had been weak since birth. As soon as he was old enough to understand, he and Aster came here to recuperate. Later, he met Caleb. Aster was speechless. To think they would confine a young daughter on such a steep cliff. What an extraordinary family. In Caleb's eyes, Edie was like a pitiful flower. But he wasn't just fragile. He was also a strong person who would draw his sword to help others. The person telling the beautiful story had an expression as beautiful as the story itself. But how similar was the lady in his story to the real Edie? Aster felt strange about himself. Why did he approach all stories with a skeptical attitude? Reportedly, Caleb and Edie's meeting could be considered a fateful encounter. That day, the gardener and the young lady were picking flowers. Suddenly, they heard a crash not far away. The young lady dropped her umbrella and ran towards the sound. They found an injured and unconscious Caleb at the bottom of a cliff. Because the young lady wanted to save him, the gardener had no choice but to use his small frame to carry Caleb back. At first, the gardener didn't like Caleb. It seemed he was afraid Caleb would take the young lady away. Aster carefully asked, "When did he pass away?" Although he didn't want to touch on Caleb's pain, he felt that except for here, Caleb wouldn't talk about Edie's story again. Caleb's expression turned sad. He went to the place where Twilight falls 3 years ago. According to this, the original owner entered the palace only a year ago, so the 2 years in between became a blank. There was a great obstacle between Caleb and Edie, and that was his only relative. His brother was a mediocre knight. Because Caleb was a world-class sword master, he became jealous and insecure, constantly obstructing their marriage and causing various troubles. Even after Edie's death, he refused Caleb's request to take the body. Although Caleb and the young lady hadn't held a ceremony, they already had a real relationship, so he hoped that after his death, he could be placed with Edie. It must be said that there's only a thin line between romance and horror. Caleb stared at Aster with a shy face. Then he stepped forward and held his hand. He said affectionately, "I'm sorry too. Although I asked him to send you to my family, I couldn't find you." From Caleb's words, Aster learned that when the original owner and the young lady were together, there was an atmosphere that no one could intrude upon. Just by quietly looking, one could tell how much they loved each other. It seemed they had reached a state where they were indistinguishable from each other. Caleb squeezed his hand again. His brother hadn't left anything to remember him by. "After you disappeared, I realized he wanted to completely erase Edie from my world." He stroked Aster's loose hair, his face full of smiles. "This is good now. Through your eyes, I can finally see him again. People should rely on themselves to feel more secure." Caleb spoke words of love to Aster, hoping he would return to his side. But Aster was content with the current situation, not wanting to rely on anyone to live. Caleb covered his heart with his hand, looking sincere. "I don't want to lose you again. When he hid you away, you can't imagine how desperate I was." However, Aster was very clear-headed. What did this have to do with him? If the original owner and Caleb were in a loving relationship, he would feel a bit guilty and wouldn't refuse like this. But he was seeing Edie through Aster, so there was nothing to say. Although leaving the palace, under his protection, he might have a comfortable life. But it would mean ending Aster's life here with this name. If so, could he return to his original world? Although he didn't know why, Aster increasingly felt that he should stay in the Queen's palace. Aster asked, "Don't you feel sad looking at me?" But Caleb looked enchanted, smiling as he said, "You are joy and happiness to me. You are the meaning of my life." But Aster expressed that seeing him made him sad. In reality, he was thinking that he was surrounded by handsome men, yet there wasn't a single character he could pursue. It was truly depressing. Fortunately, Caleb was a gentleman and chose to respect his decision. Caleb was about to go on an expedition and asked Aster for a token. But Aster thought such things should be given by a girlfriend, so he refused, saying he had nothing to give him. Caleb directly asked for the ribbon on his wrist. Aster instinctively protected it. He told him to come to the Queen's palace next time for something else. Caleb agreed and placed a kiss on the back of his hand. Just then, the sound of horse hooves was heard. The entire house began to shake. The furnishings inside toppled over. Aster quickly ran outside. He felt exasperated, thinking some madman was riding a horse on the cliff. But unexpectedly, the arrival turned out to be Mio. With a righteous face, he stated that he had come to take Aster back. Caleb didn't want to let him go, saying that besides Aster, many others could take care of the prince. But Mio wouldn't back down, saying there was only one wet nurse. Aster looked exhausted, feeling like they were using him as an excuse to compete secretly. Suddenly, Mio grabbed Aster's arm, wanted to take him away, saying the prince had been looking for him since earlier. But in reality, the prince was happily playing with the child care expert, Ellie. Aster thought this was unlikely. Mio glared at Aster with displeasure. He even extended his foot to step on him. The two secretly competed. Aster reluctantly decided to return with him. Turning around, he saw that Caleb's hand was already on his sword. A great battle was about to break out. The little servant girl had achieved the status of a great heroine. Mio came to find Aster, clashing violently with Caleb. Just as Caleb was about to draw his sword, Aster was shocked. If they really fought, Mio would surely lose terribly. To appease the furious Caleb, he smiled and said, "Let's write letters. I can write now. We can talk slowly." Caleb was instantly placated. He happily said goodbye, stating he would come for Aster's letter within half a month. Upon hearing this, Mio became unhappy. He grabbed Aster's hand. Suddenly, he confronted Caleb. "Sir, shouldn't such things be asked of your girlfriend? Aster has no relationship with you. There's no reason to give you a token." They started arguing again. Aster felt his ears burning with pain. To interrupt them, he immediately began to act. "Please don't fight because of me. Aster was secretly delighted. This was one of the classic lines that one must say once in a lifetime. He had finally achieved this goal. However, Mio stared at him with disdain. He told Aster to stop talking nonsense and lifted him onto the horse. The two of them galloped down the cliff on horseback in a whirlwind. Aster's terrified screams echoed everywhere. When they reached level ground, Aster was already lying exhausted in Mio's arms. However, Mio said he was heavy and told him to quickly testify. Aster immediately started to play tricks. Just pretend the person sitting in front of you is the one you love. But Mio was very straightforward, saying they weren't comparable. Aster ignored what he said and continued to rest. He found it strange how Mio had found him. It turned out that Hill had used the magical item he had given Aster earlier to find his unique wavelength and teleported Mio nearby. Aster was annoyed, feeling as if he had been stalked. Suddenly, Mio asked Aster what his relationship with Caleb was. Aster didn't answer directly, teasing him. Is it a complicated relationship? As expected, Mio got a bit angry. If I push you here, you'll fall down. He was indeed petty. Aster, while fixing his hair, explained that he had once served Caleb's love interest. Because the love interest situation wasn't public, no one knew about it. Suddenly, Aster remembered the little prince. Was he really crying nonstop? When Ellie was taking care of him, he had never looked for Aster. Mio's eyes wandered, guiltily saying, he was crying continuously before I left. Aster saw through it. It was obviously an excuse. He found it very strange. Why did Mio come to find him? Caleb was a protector of the kingdom. What good would come from being with him? Mio clearly loved Hugo. He even went to the extent of brainwashing the young prince for him. Aster thought Mio was stingy, childish, yet kind. He was hard to figure out. He reminded himself not to have any misconceptions about him. He had even choked the great magician in the middle of the night. The day after Aster and Mio safely returned to the queen's palace, he asked teacher Saya about the correct way to write Caleb Kara. He decided to embroider a handkerchief as a token. After staying up late, he finally completed it. Aster was confident in his embroidery skills. Hill suddenly poked his head out. Upon seeing Caleb's name, he looked disgusted. Something must have happened on the battlefield. Hill seemed to dislike Caleb very much. Aster pushed Hill onto the bed, letting him lie down next to the little prince. Hill put his finger in the sleeping prince's hand. He was instantly melted by cuteness. After a while, he fell asleep. Mio handed the little prince to Aster. They both said good job to each other. Aster felt that recently, he and Mio were like an old married couple raising two sons together. Aster turned off the oil lamp and fell asleep while gently patting the little prince. In the middle of the night, he suddenly heard violent coughing. He drowsily turned on the light. The scene before him shocked him greatly. Mio, expressionless, was tightly choking Hill's neck. Aster hurriedly pulled him away. This will kill him if it continues. Only then did Mio slowly release his grip. Aster stood in front of Hill, but was a bit scared. Mio had even choked him before. Mio still showed no emotion as he adjusted his clothes. Great magician, remember this. That's what being choked feels like. Aster was stunned for a moment, so he was helping him get revenge on Hill. But Aster felt that treating a sick person like this could easily lead to trouble. Mio, however, said Hill was very dramatic and didn't want to get better. The two had a heated argument, just like a couple discussing their child's education. This woke up the little prince. Mio picked up the prince and gently patted him to soothe him. He hoped the magician could give him and Aster each a protective charm. If he had gone berserk and retaliated just now, Mio would have died on the spot. Hill was aware of the danger. He handed magic vials to both of them and asked them to fill them with blood. Mio swiftly took out a small knife and filled one vial. He then turned and left. Aster was still concerned about the little prince's safety. It turned out that Hill had cast an absolute protection spell on him the day before, meaning that even if the prince attacked him, he wouldn't retaliate. There are many things in this world that are beyond one's control. So, he couldn't give others the right to harm himself like that. Aster could tell from his appearance that something must have happened. But at this moment, he was very concerned about Mio's unusual mood. Just as he was about to leave, Hill called out to him. He sincerely apologized to Aster, saying, "I'm sorry. You must have been very scared." At that time, Aster was both scared and angry, but now he inexplicably felt like crying. Aster didn't respond, just asked him to help look after the little prince. Then he closed the door. These two are really in love. Aster found Mio on the balcony. He expressed his gratitude for tolerating his stubborn and unreasonable demands. "So, did you take action today because you couldn't bear it anymore?" Mio instead asked Aster why he brought the magician back. Aster felt it was instinctive with with no particular reason. Mio didn't want to admit he was getting revenge for Aster and also wanted to get a protective charm for him. He just made a gesture with his hand on his neck, saying, "I just wanted to choke him, that's all." Suddenly Mio said sorry. Aster was still confused. Mio was rummaging through his pocket. He said he didn't mean to and didn't know when it had fallen to the ground. He handed over a tattered handkerchief. Instantly, Aster's shocked cry echoed throughout the entire palace. At night, Hill began to have nightmares again. The elder magicians who had trained him before, in order to make him the perfect great magician, unanimously decided to forcibly inject their magic power into Hill's body. If successful, he would become an unprecedented test subject. After some time, Hill finally woke up, but he suddenly went berserk before learning how to attack. In an instant, all the magic teachers were wiped out. Suddenly, the scene shifted to the battlefield of an expedition. Raging fires were burning, and screams were everywhere. The ground was littered with soldiers' corpses. He wanted to save them, but at this moment, he couldn't distinguish who needed to be saved, because everyone was shouting angrily at him. Hill's nightmare caused him to go berserk again. His magic power was leaking uncontrollably. He directly blasted people into pieces, friend or foe. He was awakened by this bloody scene. The first thing he received was Aster's concern. "Fortunately, it's safe here. It's not that hell, but a peaceful place with people. I probably won't find a place like this again." The next morning, Hill was awakened by the sunlight. Seeing the empty room, he suddenly felt afraid. He abruptly stood up, wanting to go out and look for them, but he heard discussions outside the door. They must be dating. It turned out that Ellie and Anna had known for a long time that Aster and Mio were living together. Aster was quite careless and often wore Mio's clothes. Anna said thankfully, "It's a good thing I'm slow. If someone else had seen it, it would have been a big problem. Look, her door is open again." Suddenly, his expression changed to shock. The three of them just stared at each other. The secret of the three living together was discovered. Hill had no choice. He immediately used magic to promote the two. He snapped his fingers to hypnotize them. From now on, they would forget the existence of that room. Even if they saw the room, they wouldn't remember anything about him. That evening, Aster sat in the room sighing. Mio, holding the little prince, was also nervous, like a child who had done something wrong and didn't dare to speak. Hill looked at the atmosphere between the two. He started to persuade Aster. "He's so pitiful. I can't bear to watch. Just forgive him." Aster was furious. "First ask my embroidery if it forgives him. I finally finished it, and now I have to start over. There's not much time left." That day, Klein came to see Aster. He would be leaving for battle in 3 days. Aster wrapped the music box parts in the handkerchief he had originally embroidered. He gave the female one to him. "The music box won't work without all the parts. Return it to me later. There are so few things from the original owner. I had no choice but to give you this." Klein seemed a bit surprised. He had seen it before in Edie's small room. This feeling was like recovering a lost heirloom. It was exciting. Then Aster took out that pen. However, Klein's expression revealed something strange. "This isn't mine. I've seen him with this pen. It seems he gave it to you." Klein stared at Aster very gently. "Promise me if anything happens, go to Caliph. I have no interest in the kingdom's war. I only hope my participation will benefit you." He kissed Aster's hand. "No matter where I am, I will definitely return to your side, because you are the meaning of my existence." Aster said expressionlessly, "Please return safely." But in his heart, he was very clear. "If I didn't know about your girlfriend, would these words be a little sweeter?" Klein finally left for battle. He wouldn't be seen for a while. The crowd was boiling, like a parade. That day, Teacher Saya told Aster that now he not only had to learn to read and write, but also learn etiquette, social manners, and writing like a noble education. Now, Aster was one of the top bride candidates in the kingdom. Many people would think that getting her would elevate their status. Teacher Saya was also quite frank. "I'm also interested in improving my status." But the next second, he said, "But I'm more interested in you as a person." Aster thought he looked so radiant saying this. Today's lesson was learning social dance. Saya took out something like a speaker from his bag. Then he gentlemanly extended an invitation. He pulled Aster up in one swift motion. His hand on her waist, Aster, who had never danced before, completed the dance in perfect harmony with Saya. It drew a round of applause. Saya leaned in close to her ear. He whispered, "The restaurant we went to last time has new items. Want to go together?" Saya invited Aster to go to the restaurant from last time. Aster smiled happily and very naturally agreed. The next day, while tidying up the tea set, he suddenly remembered what Saya had said. His heart started racing and his face turned red. Is this a date invitation? Is this what they call giving the green light? Then he paused. Am I getting too excited? After all, men here flirt as frequently as they breathe. I can't let my guard down just because it wasn't mentioned in the escape season. After all, Yug has the attribute of making people fall in love with him. Currently, I can confirm I haven't fallen for him. Only Klein and Saya don't have much screen time. They're people with almost no presence. I still need to be cautious. At this moment, Anna curiously asked about his relationship with Mio and Klein. If he had to say, it was a relationship without any real meaning. Aster couldn't answer. Whispering gossip, does Mio have someone he likes? And is she a beauty? But Anna and Ellie found it strange. Mio gave the impression that he liked Aster. However, Aster had never thought about it that way. He just felt they were close because they lived together. He believed that hearts might change, but love wouldn't easily alter. At least that's how he was. That day, Aster stared at the two sleeping figures, playing point, ice point fragrance, deciding from whom to borrow money. When he pointed at Mio, he shook his head, thinking Mio looked like he had no money. Then he raised his hand and slapped Hill hard, waking Hill from his sleep. He clutched his arm, which was stinging with pain. Aster apologized half-heartedly, then smiled brightly. Lend me some money, like the rent from before. I'm going on a date. Hill instinctively thought he was going out with Mio. Sir Mio didn't seem like someone who couldn't afford a date, but Aster said he wasn't going on a date with him. Hill stared thoughtfully at Mio, who was pretending to sleep. Then he kicked him to the ground. He even questioned from above, aren't you and Aster in a relationship? This is like a story about my parents that who aren't married. He was emotionally agitated. If you're not in a relationship, why are you sleeping together? The two carefree individuals thought it was perfectly normal for the sake of close protection and childcare efficiency. Aster was even quite proud. This is Aster's method of maximizing efficiency with minimal people. Mio, taking the little prince, also fully agreed with this statement. This was completely beyond Hill's imagination. He blurted out, Sir Mio, I thought at least you were normal. Clearly, he thought Aster's thought process was extraordinarily peculiar. Aster didn't want to continue discussing this issue. He illogically but boldly extended his hand. Lend me money. The female lead showed you what it means to be rich and foolish. The two arrived at the previous restaurant for their date. Teacher Saya thoughtfully asked, are your shoes comfortable for walking today? It turned out he had noticed Aster's discomfort last time. Aster's heart raced, his face flushing. A man as attentive as the teacher must be very popular, right? Teacher Saya rested his face on his hand, smiling, and said honestly, it seems you haven't met any good men. After the meal, the two were walking hand in hand along the summer streets. They came to a fountain. It was very lively here. There was even a legend that if you throw a copper coin into its mouth, your wish will come true. Aster excitedly rummaged through his small purse. This was snatched from Hill. He quickly took out a coin, swiftly threw it towards the fountain. However, it fell into the water with a splash. He happily scratched his head. This is indeed hard to aim. Then he handed his purse over. Teacher, you throw one too. Saya's face had turned pale. He was sweating profusely. You just threw a gold coin. You do know that, right? Aster was stunned. This black thing is actually a gold coin. It looks exactly like a 10 yuan coin from the previous world. Saya looked at the bag full of gold coins, amazed. How much salary did you take out? This is what Aster snatched. I don't usually need much money. So he wasn't clear about the currency value in this country. He didn't even know where to collect his salary. Aster looked at the lovely atmosphere around him. He realized that in others' eyes, he and Saya might look like that couple. Suddenly, Saya noticed Aster's gaze. He smiled and leaned closer, causing Aster's heart to race and his face to flush. The two held hands as they headed to teacher Saya's paradise. Passing through a large forest, they arrived at an uninhabited ruin. Whenever he needed to rest, he would come here. Aster was amazed by the magnificent architecture. Something like a UFO was embedded in the tree trunk. It created a magical scene, half withered and half lush, just like the giant mountain rats of this world. Saya invited Aster to sit under the tree. The air here was fresh. However, Aster looked at the big flying saucer above his head, very afraid it might collapse. Saya had already lain down, looking enchanted. The scent of grass and this tranquility were refreshing. Aster lay down and closed his eyes. He also felt the rare beauty. Aster and teacher Saya arrived at the secret base. They lay on the grass, chatting about everything. They talked about unrealized dreams. Surprisingly, Saya had always fantasized about becoming a magician. But because magicians are born, not made, he had to give up. Aster's dream was to go home, but no one in this world could understand him. He could only smile and say his dream was to build the family he wanted, a family like others have. In the relaxed atmosphere, he fell asleep after a while. He only woke up when night fell. Aster woki saya up. When he opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was Aster's beautiful, smiling face. Against the backdrop of the night sky, it looked especially enchanting. He smiled and said, "Aster, there are stars in your eyes too." After ending the day's date, Aster returned to the queen's palace. Hill said on the side, "I saw Yuga today." Hearing this, Aster was shocked and dropped the water glass he was holding. It shattered on the ground. Hill made a tisk-tisk sound, very disapproving of his clumsiness, but concerned if he was hurt. Then he told him not to move. He raised his hand, used magic to restore the glass. He also cast a purification spell to make the water drinkable. Aster was very confused about why the two of them were in the kitchen. It turned out that Yuga had given Hill a packet of tea today, said to be very effective for treating insomnia, so he wanted to try it. Mio's intention was obvious, but he couldn't say it directly, so he just said he was thirsty and followed. Aster asked Hill about his impression of Yuga. Hill just said, "We've only met once at a banquet, but he recognized me at first sight. He's quite attentive, a beautiful person emitting golden light. Other than that, no other feelings." Aster was a bit surprised. In the escape plot, it was written that Yuga helped Hill improve his insomnia. Because of this, Hill fell in love with Yuga and became his follower. But it should be impossible to win over a follower with just this small packet of tea. However, his looks were like an absolute rule in this world. They were magical. All the fish in his Playboy pond fell in love at first sight the moment they saw him. Previously, he was worried that the powerful magician would also become his follower, so he had been anxious about their meeting. But he only commented that he was beautiful. Could it be that something in the original story had changed? While making tea and chatting with Hill, the two were so familiar that they spoke in their own language, leaving Aster out. It was said that Klein was about to return because the royal prisoners of war from Rohai had arrived. The three of them tasted the tea. Hill expressed that he was touched that Yuga could give him such a gift, showing he was a thoughtful and kind person. Unlike the fairy, or such names he was called in the queen's palace. If the tea tastes good, you might even like her. Aster felt a bit of panic in his heart. How could he say such ominous words? Surprisingly, all three of them unanimously praised the taste of the tea. The next day, Aster made tea to share with Saya, but it tasted terribly bad. Aster was embarrassed. Wasn't it just throwing the tea leaves in after the water boiled? Saya took a sip and asked directly if he could make the tea again. Thus, tea-making skills were added to Aster's curriculum. Suddenly, Anna rushed over anxiously, shouting that something terrible had happened. Her face was very pale, and her whole body was trembling. The prince has disappeared. Anna and Ellie were supposed to take turns watching him, but during the shift change, he vanished in the blink of an eye. If discovered, everyone would be executed. Aster comforted her, saying they must stay calm now. The two stayed to check the room. Saya and Aster went to quietly search the corridor. The worst part was that the queen had visitors today. According to royal etiquette, even guards outside the door would leave the door slightly open to prevent incidents inside. Aster feared the prince might have sneaked in unnoticed, so he decided to crouch down to avoid others' sight and quietly peek inside. But his target was too big, and Sir Alex spotted him. Aster made a shushing gesture, indicating not to make a sound. Fortunately, he was a good person and cooperated, though he looked extremely stiff. Aster tugged at his trouser leg, asking if he had seen the little prince. However, the answer was negative. The queen's sister's voice came from inside. "I want a child now, no matter what. Whatever the cost, it doesn't matter." Aster peeked inside secretly, trying hard to find any sign of the little prince. Suddenly, he was hit hard on the head from behind. Aster collapsed instantly. Blood kept flowing from his head. His ears were ringing with a loud wind chime sound. When he saw those snake-like eyes, Aster understood. He was the queen's sister's husband, Klein's beloved Edie's brother, Selarkarji. Aster, who was searching for the little prince, was suddenly hit on the head with a stick from behind. Blood flowed immediately. Alex quickly stood in front of Aster. "Count Kargi, he's not someone you can dispose of at will. He's the prince's wet nurse. He must have his reasons for doing this." Seller's face was contorted with disgust. A servant is just a servant. How dare a wet nurse eavesdrop on the queen's conversation? Alex still protected him from the front. "Even if his status is low, it's not for you to punish. Don't make this a big issue." Seller frowned, very angry inside, but unable to vent. After having someone announce him, he entered the queen's room. Soon, The door was thrown open with a loud bang. Seller dragged his wife out, striding towards the exit. The Countess still wanted to explain, but Seller told her to shut up and that they'd talk at home. Finally, peace returned to the Queen's chambers. The little prince was also found behind the screen in the room, stroking the little prince's smiling face. Wiping the blood from his forehead, Aster thought, "You must repay me when you grow up." He felt very sad inside. Whenever he started to feel a connection with this world, it seemed to push him away, saying, "You don't belong to this world." Was he becoming reluctant to leave? No, now he was more certain, "I can't survive in this world." The prince's doctor bandaged Aster's wound. The maids around were at a loss. They concernedly told him to rest well. Even though Aster said he was fine, he was still pushed into the room. Since that was the case, he flopped onto the bed. After calming down, he remembered Seller's cold eyes, full of evil, revealing contempt that didn't see him as human. Under his gaze, even breathing was difficult. Although very displeased, his appearance seemed to connect those messy, unconnected pieces of information. He had a psychological shadow about his birth that tormented him his whole life. The novel wrote that Yuga resolved his inner conflict with just a few words. Afterwards, Seller began to obsessively adore Yuga, who had saved him. He even destroyed the Queen's maiden family for him. There seemed to be parts unknown to those outside the novel. The moment Aster saw him, his appearance similar to Klein's and those identical eyes, he was almost certain they shared the same blood. The day after Aster was injured, Yuga and the king suddenly visited without notice. Yuga walked straight to Aster. He kept poking at his wound with his fingers, saying, "I heard you were injured. Does it hurt?" Actually, he had already healed it with magic last night, but fearing others might notice, he still wore the bandage. Aster was speechless. For others, that was still a wound. How could he poke it so hard? At this time, the king asked about the little prince. Yuga quickly pulled his hand and ran to the cradle. He picked up the prince, asking joyfully, "Isn't he cute?" As if showing off his own child. The prince didn't seem to like Yuga, constantly kicking him with his feet, saying incomprehensible words telling him to go away. Aster inwardly exclaimed, "What a good baby." Suddenly, the door was thrown open, banging against the wall. The queen walked in. As soon as the king saw the queen, he started, "I heard from Yuga that there was a commotion yesterday. We entrusted you with the precious heir, yet you can't even watch a child properly." Aster was very afraid inside, but he didn't want to see the poor queen suffer such false accusations. He bravely stepped forward. "It was all this servant's fault. It has nothing to do with the queen. She's not involved in this at all." The king asked Yuga, "Is this Aster?" "He's just as you described." He started speaking sarcastically. "I thought the queen wasn't interested in politics. Didn't expect her to manage the prince's household so well." Then, the king and queen began a conversation that others couldn't understand. The king was very angry, his face turning red, forbidden to leave. The queen during the day was stiff and lifeless, as if acting, which pained Aster greatly, although he had no right to feel sorry for her. Just then, Yuga suddenly called out to Aster from behind. He handed over a box of tea to improve Hill's insomnia. Aster was shocked. He had no outward connection with Hill, let alone anyone knowing they lived together. Yuga interrupted him, saying, "As I said, I like you, so I'll tell you a secret. In this palace, there's nothing I don't know." After saying this, he ran back to the king with a bright smile, leaving Aster completely bewildered. Only he and the little prince were left in the room. The king and queen rarely visited, yet neither thought to hold him, not even pat his head. Aster looked at the little prince with a gentle face. "They came to see you because they were worried. They love you very much." Although Aster wanted to tell him more than once, "Your father is a big villain," but facing such a small child, how could he be at peace with that? The next day, while Aster was in class, Klein suddenly appeared. Klein, who was on an expedition, suddenly appeared in the queen's palace. The main army hadn't returned yet, but he came back alone. Because he missed Aster too much, Klein was like a god on the battlefield. A war that was supposed to take 3 months was shortened to 1 month. Moreover, all the royals except the king were captured and brought back as prisoners. Therefore, the palace was in a rush preparing for the victory ceremony. Saya also hurriedly began teaching Aster martial arts. Klein suddenly pulled Aster to his side. Blushing and smiling, he said, "Let me join your class. Don't worry, I'm very good at dancing." After greeting Saya, he said he had something to discuss with Aster. Saya was very tactful and left. Under the forceful pressure, "Have you been well? Has anyone bullied you?" In Aster's heart, the first person he subconsciously thought of was Yuga. His very existence was the source of pain. Now there was also Seller's attack added to it. Thinking of this, Aster suddenly raised his hand and touched Klein's face. This man, called the god of war, had eyes full of warmth and gentleness. Though they had the same eye color, Seller's eyes only held an endless, icy coldness. He wondered if he could ask him about having any brothers. Klein grabbed Aster's hand as he was about to withdraw it. Smiling, he placed it back on his face. Aster came to his senses, realizing what he had just done. He quickly pulled his hand back, saying, "No one has bullied me." Klein looked at his empty hand, full of disappointment. Then he smiled and invited Aster for a walk. He had brought gifts for Aster from this expedition. He had privately kept 2 items from the spoils of war. When the box opened, it burst with a dazzling golden light. These were earrings worn by generations of Rohai queens. Such an elaborate style didn't suit Aster at all, but not wanting to discourage him, Aster could only praise they're beautiful. "I'll wear them when I get my ears pierced someday." He seemed a bit disappointed, his whole demeanor deflated. Then he pulled out a music box. He had commissioned a famous local craftsman in Rohai. The female figurine on top was based on Aster's name, from the letter Aster had sent him. But due to the pose, it looked like she was running away. Aster happily thanked Klein. Seeing her good mood, he wanted to take the chance to ask about Seller. Just then, the entire sky turned red. Several huge fireballs flew rapidly from a distance. Falling straight down, when danger struck, he used his body to shield Aster. Countless fireballs suddenly appeared in the sky. At this moment, in the Queen's palace, Ellie, standing by the window, heard a huge rumbling sound. By the time she realized it was too late, she couldn't react in time. After a flash of light, Ellie disappeared completely with the explosion, leaving Anna's helpless screams. The palace was in chaos. Everyone was running and screaming. Aster was completely stunned, frozen in place, until he heard Klein's voice calling him back to his senses. By now, Klein was bleeding from his head. He firmly held up the collapsing ceiling above Aster with both hands. His arms were constantly bleeding. Even so, he felt it was fine as long as Aster was safe and sound. As a knight, his hands were so heavy. Now both his right hand and left arm were severely injured. Aster trembled in fear. Yet Klein still smiled and comforted him. "I'm fine, don't worry." Aster suddenly realized they couldn't stay here any longer. He stood up to make room for Klein. This was the only thing he could do. With creaking sounds constantly ringing out, Klein used all his strength to twist open. The building directly crumbled. Aster felt deeply guilty about his own incompetence. Why was he such a weak and insignificant person, unable to help at all? At this moment, he hated himself even more. He was now in tears. Klein gently wiped away the tears from his eyes. Still smiling, he said, "As long as I'm by your side, you have nothing to fear." Just then, fireballs rained down from the sky again, landing nearby. Without any hesitation, Klein pulled Aster into his arms. This meteor shower was caused by the escaped Rohai queen. Aster was completely stunned. Wasn't it only great magicians like Hill who could use such advanced magic? Thinking of this, he suddenly remembered what Hill had once said. He had cast a defensive spell in the room. If anything happened, they should go there. No one else knew there was a safe place in the Queen's palace, including Aster, who hugged Klein tightly, as if making a final farewell. "I need to find the prince. After all, I'm his wet nurse." Aster chose to enter the Queen's palace at the risk of her life. In fact, she was very afraid. She also didn't understand why the king had appointed her as the wet nurse. She didn't like the prince at all. But as a wet nurse, even if the prince was a burden to her, she wanted to fulfill her responsibility. Even in a life-threatening situation, she had to rush into that sea of fire. Aster looked back at Klein's bloodied hands, feeling very anxious. If it weren't for him, she would be dead by now. She looked around and found a sharp piece of stone on the ground. She tore off a piece of cloth from her skirt and bandaged his wound. Klein's palms were already a bloody mess. He wiped the blood from his face, but it only got dirtier. Aster couldn't bear to watch, so she helped clean him up. Klein was like a puppy trying to please its owner, nuzzling her palm. He gazed at Aster lovingly. "Even if you're going to hell, I'm willing to go with you." Klein pulled Aster along as they ran through the ruins. But due to his lack of exercise, he was already out of breath. Despite his severely injured arm, Klein picked Aster up directly. "Excuse me, but I think this will be faster." Aster inadvertently got close to Hill, who was resisting the attacks with electricity. Klein seemed to sense something and told her to duck. Then he used magic to protect them both, passing straight through the scorching flames into the queen's palace. High-level sword mages like Klein could do such things, but just now, to protect Aster, he couldn't stay calm at all. The queen's palace was already damaged beyond recognition. Flames were burning everywhere. They even had to climb to go up. Suddenly, another huge meteor fell again. The entire palace was shaking. The path ahead had been smashed into a big hole. Klein held Aster tightly, hoping to give her more sense of security. "Trust me, you just need to look into my eyes." Klein's eyes were grayish-blue, like the sky before snow on the coldest winter day. However, contrary to that, he was always gentle and kind to Aster. He used his magic and jumped with all his might. But due to the distance being too far, they crashed heavily onto the ground. To protect Aster and his arms from falling, Klein used his broken hands to absorb the impact. Immediately, his bones made a cracking sound. Not wanting Aster to worry or feel guilty, he gritted his teeth and endured the heart-wrenching pain. After countless hardships, they finally reached the upper level. The corridor in front of the prince's room was mostly intact, while the lower floors were destroyed, leaving only the skeleton. Even the impact of meteors would cause the entire building to shake violently. It was clear this place wouldn't last long. Aster rushed into the prince's room. The huge hole in front of her made her heart tremble. Just then, Anna's cries were heard. She was seen trembling all over, with the little prince crying incessantly in her arms. Nearby, Mio was severely injured, stabbed in the abdomen while trying to protect them. Aster asked confusedly about Ellie's whereabouts, but was interrupted by another attack. She hurriedly led everyone to her room. Sure enough, it was unscathed. Mio lay on the bed in pain. His condition was very bad. He had a high fever, but at least he wouldn't die before the little prince grew up. Only now did Aster finally remember this matter. For Yug and the king, it was a trivial matter, so it was only briefly mentioned in the novel. This caused Aster to not remember it immediately. But for minor characters, it was a deadly and massive disaster. Aster cut a piece of cloth with a knife to bandage Mio's wound. He then asked about Ellie's whereabouts. Anna immediately choked up. People who were together just moments ago disappeared after a flash of fire and the collapse of the ceiling. Aster smiled comfortingly, saying she must have safely escaped and just couldn't make it back up yet. But this explanation was just a wishful thought. No one wanted to expose the truth. At this time, the queen's palace was still under attack. But this room was extremely stable. All attacks were blocked outside the window. The entire room was filled with Hill's magical aura. Klein was very aware of this, but he wanted an explanation from Aster. After all, in his eyes, Hill was a lazy and cowardly great mage. He had never put in such effort on the battlefield. If he could use such magic, there wouldn't have been incidents of killing allies. Thinking about this, Klein felt a sharp pain in his head, finding it hard to believe. Suddenly, a loud rumbling sound was heard. A meteor had fallen into the adjacent room. That was the queen's quarters. Aster suddenly felt dizzy. How could she have forgotten about the queen? Was anyone taking care of her? What if she was all alone? She abruptly stood up. With a determined look in her eyes, she said, "I have to go bring the queen here." Everyone was extremely surprised. However, she still insisted and refused Klein's offer to accompany her. "You've lost too much blood. I'll go alone. It won't be dangerous." Some things are easier said than done. Aster was originally a very clear-headed person. The world is dark and dangerous, and everyone must survive on their own. If she hadn't remembered that night, she would never have gotten involved. Aster ran quickly, hoping the queen had already reached a safe place, even if it meant she would have run in vain. However, when she pushed open the door, the queen was already in a perilous situation, like a princess waiting for a prince to rescue her in a high tower. The worst-case scenario had indeed happened. The situation here was even more miserable than in the prince's room. No one had come to help the poor queen. She was too scared to move, collapsed on the spot. After the meteor crashed through the ceiling, it went straight through the floor. The bottom was unfathomable, having penetrated even to the underground. There was almost nowhere to step. Aster's eyes were determined, giving herself encouragement. She grabbed the protruding patterns on the wall, slowly inching forward. Suddenly, the only wooden plank under her feet broke. Aster instantly lurched forward, about to fall. She quickly reacted, jumping forward a step. Fortunately, she survived. Aster grasped the queen's hand, smiling and saying, "Let's leave this place together. There's a safe place." The rescued queen smiled happily. She held Aster's hand tightly. Now, they could only return from the other side. Although there was more space to step here, there was a gap ahead that needed to be jumped across using a wooden plank. Aster simulated the scene in her mind, hoping it could bear the weight of two people. However, misfortunes never come singly. At this already dangerous moment, the entire building began to shake. Aster suddenly lost her footing and was about to fall backward. Luckily, the queen was quick and swiftly pulled her back. She had saved a life. Taking advantage of the pause and the shaking, Aster quickly jumped forward. When she looked back, she was suddenly struck with horror. A large chunk of the only wooden plank was missing. However, the queen said nothing. She lightly stepped and jumped with graceful movements. Just as she was about to reach Aster, due to the distance being too far, she was about to fall straight into the deep abyss. In this critical moment, Aster desperately grabbed the edge with one hand. With the other hand, she quickly grabbed the queen. The crown fell into the roaring black hole, with no sound of it hitting the ground. The queen, not wanting to burden Aster, looked extremely calm, with a resigned expression. "Let go," said the queen, hanging at the edge of the black hole, calmly telling Aster to release her hand. But Aster continued to hold on with all her might, gripping tightly. However, she was constantly being pulled over. If this continued, neither of them would survive. She kept comforting the queen, who wanted to give up, saying that if they held on a bit longer, they would surely be saved. The intense pain from the pulling made her feel like her arm was about to break off. The hand gripping the edge was continuously dripping blood. The queen's hand was also slowly slipping. Gritting her teeth, Aster persevered desperately. Her thoughts were in turmoil. The queen clearly had the status of royalty, so why had no one come to save her? Klein was also like this before. If I were a strong knight like Klein, would I be able to save the queen? Aster was already in tears. She hated her own incompetence. In the face of death, she was terrified. But letting go would frighten her even more. If she shouted loudly, would her voice reach the room? Or should she let go of the supporting hand and try pulling with both hands? Just then, another attack caused the building to shake violently. The two tightly clasped hands finally couldn't hold on any longer. Aster was so desperate that her eyes lost focus. After holding on for so long, was it all going to end like this? At this critical moment, the queen was suddenly pulled out of the black hole. Klein smiled at Aster, saying, "I told you I should have come along." Suddenly, Aster's hand was grabbed. Mio stared at the bloody palm with concern. "Why do you always get hurt?" Aster cried. These were tears of joy. She looked at Mio, excitedly thinking to herself, "You came, my knight." The queen, now out of danger, sincerely thanked Klein for such an incident to occur, yet no one came to take care of the queen. Just from this point alone, she should realize how difficult her situation was. Mio helped Aster to her feet, carefully dusting off her dress. Seeing him act as if nothing had happened, Aster concernedly asked about his injuries. It was only then that he remembered his own severe injuries, the pain suddenly intensifying. Aster invited the queen to come to her room, saying it was safe there. However, the queen looked at Aster's injured palm, examining it closely. It must be very painful. Then, she quickly pulled out the fragments embedded in the flesh. Aster screamed internally from the pain, but she politely said, "Thank you for your kindness." Aster turned her head, looking at Mio with teary eyes. If pulling out a single splinter hurt so much, how painful must it have been for him to remove such a large object? Aster had a morbidly devilish curiosity and decided to watch closely from the side. After enduring a series of hardships, the four finally returned safely to the room. The queen smiled with joy seeing the young prince safe and sound. She gently poked his little cheeks, but she refused to hug him. The child must have been frightened. Listening to a familiar heartbeat would be better. But in reality, she didn't like the young prince much. Due to his hair color, he didn't look like her child. Aster instinctively nodded in agreement. Just then, Klein asked curiously, "Why are there two beds in this room?" Aster glanced at Mio, pondering how to explain away the situation. She could only lie, saying, "Sometimes it's too tiring to be with the young prince, so we sleep in the same room. But we can't sleep together with the prince, so there are two beds." Aster desperately tried to change the subject. More importantly, don't you think the meteor's target seemed to be the queen's palace? Before the main hall was protected by a barrier, the meteors flying towards it were noticeably fewer than those aimed at the queen's palace. However, as a duchess from a marquis family, it's unlikely she'd have any grudges with a small country like Rohai. Aster wondered to herself, surely they wouldn't attack here because of some benefit from Yuga. Suddenly, her back felt hot. Aster curiously opened the door. Raging flames were blocked outside the door. How were they going to leave like this? Aster cried bitterly. In the end, the whole room might roll down like a box. Just then, a swirl of white light appeared. Hill suddenly appeared in the room. His presence here meant that the Queen of Rohai had been captured. His first concern was whether Aster was all right. Then he noticed her injured palm, looking pained. He bent down and blew a breath. After a flash of white light, Aster's palm miraculously healed, showing no signs of ever being injured. She marveled at this wonder, her eyes shining. She began to talk endlessly about the current situation. Hill looked at her with an indulgent expression. "I'm a great mage. Mages are the ones who establish rules." He gently raised his hand, unleashing enormous magical power. The entire Queen's palace was bathed in a cool breeze. All the fires were extinguished. Aster was captivated by this magical spell. After briefly introducing the people in the room, Hill stepped forward to heal the two severely injured individuals. Indeed, magic seemed like a universal panacea. It was all absorbed into his hands. With a gentle squeeze, it disappeared. After a simple treatment, the two were restored to their original state. Klein repeatedly clenched his fist to check. After confirming there were no issues, he sighed in relief. Although he told Aster it was nothing, he was actually very afraid of not being able to wield a sword again. Even so, he chose to sacrifice that hand to protect Aster. Such an act would move anyone, but Aster kept reminding herself not to be moved. On the night of the attack, due to severe damage to the Queen's palace, all survivors packed their belongings and gathered outside the palace. The bodies of the victims were laid out in an open area. As expected, Ellie was among them. The beautiful wish was ultimately shattered. Anna broke down crying, collapsing to the side, unable to calm down for a long time. There were also a few other acquaintances and girlfriends who had died. Things came to a hasty conclusion. The living had to continue living. Aster was transferred to Yuga's magnificent palace, the real Queen's palace that had been taken. It was Aster's first time entering here. The splendor and opulence left her in awe. There were numerous maids and guards, and even dedicated entertainers. Yuga stood at the center of the upper level, smiling as he greeted Aster. "It's truly delightful to have you serve the prince in my palace." The powerful aura he emitted left Aster stunned. He tilted his head and invited her to have a cup of tea. The spacious hall was quickly transformed into a dining area. All kinds of desserts were available. It was clearly a preemptive move. A maid brought in a crib. Aster placed the sleeping little prince inside. After all that had happened, he was also exhausted and sleeping soundly. Yuga, who approached, looked a bit haggard. He brought up the tragic state of the Queen's palace, asking with concern, "You must have been terribly frightened, right?" Aster spoke honestly. The meteors seemed to only fall on the Queen's palace. It's surprising that this place wasn't affected at all. Yuga leisurely sipped his tea and replied with a smile, "Meteors fell here too, but the great mage has already helped repair everything. We really should thank him properly." Hearing this, Aster was shocked. It could actually be repaired. At the same time, she felt disheartened. Logically and emotionally, they should have repaired the Queen's palace first. Yuga suddenly brought up the item he had asked Aster to give to Hill a few days ago. Because she found it suspicious, Aster had hidden it away. It was convenient to say it was lost during this incident. But Yuga still didn't give up. He continued to bring out new tea and medicine. "The great mage has done so much for us. I can't repay him enough. This tea and medicine are beneficial for insomnia, just like what you're drinking now." Aster instantly lost control and spat out what she hadn't yet swallowed. Yuga didn't mind at all, laughing heartily as he asked, "How is it? Fragrant, isn't it?" After the attack, Aster was transferred to Yuga's palace. That night, after the butler had arranged her living quarters and belongings, he left. Aster was very curious about the nearby garden. She took a walk with the little prince. The courtyard was beautiful in the moonlight. The decorations and design here showed how much the king valued her. In the pond, there were even koi fish larger than the prince. At this moment, the medicine in Aster's pocket fell out. Although the tea seemed fine when she drank it earlier, she wasn't sure about this medicine. Feeling a bit guilty, Aster poured the medicine into the fish pond, mentally apologizing to the koi. She felt it wasn't right to give it to Hill, but not giving it wasn't right either. She could only let the koi try it first. But why did Yuga give her this thing? Could it be that if something went wrong, he'd blame it on her? Looking at him, he didn't seem like someone who'd use such petty tricks. After returning, Aster began writing an observation diary. Today, for the koi, the fish gathered from all directions to eat the food. Although it was spectacular, it was also somewhat disgusting. Just then Anna and Mio arrived. Anna, though freshly washed, still had red-rimmed eyes. She burst into tears. Ellie's family was in a remote countryside. Probably no one could come to see her off. Aster and the little prince weren't allowed to attend the funeral either. She felt deeply guilty. Ellie was a good person. She had raised several younger siblings herself, and genuinely liked the little prince. If it weren't for her own clumsy self being the wet nurse, Ellie wouldn't have lost her life helping there. Late at night, Aster returned to her room. There was only one bed. She unabashedly invited Mio to sleep together on the bed. Mio was visibly shaken, but Sundra-like, refused, curling up on a small sofa nearby. Aster didn't say anything more. She wrapped herself tightly in the blanket. Secretly, her eyes were also red-rimmed. In fact, the day's experiences left her shaken and distressed. She just kept up a calm appearance, not letting others see her cry. Mio noticed her unusual state and called out to her repeatedly, but Aster didn't know what to say. Aster suddenly sat up, shouting, "I'm going to sleep now." Her whole body was shaking uncontrollably. She still couldn't believe Ellie was gone. Was this intense emotion sadness? Or was she angry at someone? She buried her face in her knees, not wanting to show her vulnerability. She felt she shouldn't be thinking like this, yet it seemed she had to keep thinking to stay alive. Her mind was already on the verge of collapse. She just hoped the day would never dawn. He actually said he was Aster's master. Early in the morning, Aster composed herself. She took the little prince out for a walk. They were about to go feed the koi, but met Selikaji at the door. Aster immediately felt fear, stepping back. Why was he here? However, Selikaji directly accused, "Let me hear the reason for your betrayal." Aster. Aster was completely unfamiliar with this name and didn't know how to react. Seeing this, Selikaji became angrier. "You don't even want to defend yourself." Aster hesitantly asked, "Did I betray the count?" Hearing this, Selikaji frowned deeply. He raised his cane and pointed it at Aster. His expression instantly darkened. "Watch your words, Dr. Aster. Isn't your master your sister's maid? Why do you call him master?" Aster had no choice but to play along. "I'm sorry. Did I betray my master?" It turned out that she hadn't reported to him for these few months, so Selikaji considered this betrayal. "So you've become the prince's wet nurse. You think you can escape?" Aster stared at him calmly. "Because there are many eyes and ears around, I thought I should be careful. I didn't want to cause trouble for my master." This flattery seemed to please Selikaji. He snorted coldly in a Sundra manner and lowered his cane. "Have you found the magic circle?" Aster was very surprised to hear about the magic circle. Could he be referring to the one in the basement? Not knowing his intentions, Aster could only lie and say she hadn't found it yet. As expected, Selikaji's expression turned cold again. "You're really useless. Don't forget it was I who picked you up, gave you a name, and raised you. So you belong to me from head to toe. You should be grateful I gave you a chance to repay me. I must say, this is really an unlikable guy. I don't know if it's his inferiority complex that makes him antisocial, or if he's just naturally antisocial." Aster screamed inwardly. This person definitely has no friends. He's even more unlikable than the annoying Yuga. Aster wanted to extract some useful information. How would finding the magic circle help the master? Selikaji obviously didn't want to tell her, only saying finding that is equivalent to having all the weapon clues. "There's only one in the queen's palace. This is why I sent you into the palace." This time, Aster finally understood. He was the culprit who pushed the original owner into this cruel life. Aster encountered Selikaji in Yuga's palace. Only then did she realize he was the culprit who pushed the original owner into the fire pit. Suddenly, Selikaji mentioned Klein. "You must be happy to see someone you've missed for so long." Seeing Aster didn't refute, Selikaji was extremely displeased. It turned out he thought the original owner liked Klein. But Aster believed, even if this were true, after Edie had been dead for so long, Klein only found the original owner now. He should have moved on. Now her head was in a mess. What kind of relationship did these people have? Selikaji didn't say much more. He was about to leave directly. Aster anxiously asked from behind, "How should I submit the report?" Selikaji said this was Yuga's palace, with many people around. He would come personally later. Aster screamed in her heart, "Please don't come." Still not recovered, Aster, with a vacant look, took the little prince to feed the fish. Maybe because it was delicious, they seemed to have gone crazy. "If only I could live such a simple life. What should I do if Selikaji suddenly comes? How to explain to Anna and Mio? It's really difficult. Aster began to organize her thoughts. 3 years ago, Edie passed away. Klein had been moving around the battlefield ever since. The original owner obeyed orders and entered the queen's palace. Selikaji married the queen's sister, but for some reason, they never had children. The queen, who also had no children, became pregnant with the little prince. I thought that magic circle was used to treat infertility, but seeing how he treats the countess, he doesn't seem like someone who would do such a thing. Could this magic circle have other uses? Selikaji's eyes do look very similar to Klein's. Seeing how they dislike each other, could one of them be an illegitimate child? I heard such things were common in the past. I need to ask Klein about this. If it's Klein, he should tell me everything. If it's him, the only one in this world who would never hurt me. That night, it started raining outside. Anna was shivering, soaked to the bone. She had been crying all day, her eyes so swollen she could barely open them. According to her, Ellie and the others' bodies were cremated outside the royal city. I don't know if it's true, but they deliberately chose to steal the meteorite from the queen's palace. People outside the palace were mostly unharmed, and most hit by debris. Fortunately, most people in the queen's palace had taken shelter in the underground kitchen. The meteorite barely hit there. Aster looked at the constantly sobbing Anna and hugged her tightly. Actually, when the king swung the mirror at the wet nurse, Aster felt she wasn't from the same world as them. But being together leads to getting to know each other. Contact leads to feelings. How could one not like such kind and gentle people? After the accident, she seemed to have become a different person. On the third day of feeding medicine to the koi, they seemed not only fatter, but their scales were also shiny and glossy. Aster wondered if this was some kind of tonic. After finishing, she returned to the palace. Liana was lying on the ground, looking at something. Their sudden appearance startled her. But Anna said she was checking the cleanliness of the place. It was spotless, completely different from the queen's palace. Even the carpets were made of silk. Anna sighed, it seems they have plenty of staff here. Seeing this, Aster joked, "Do you want to apply to work in Lord Yuga's palace?" Anna just smiled without saying anything. Aster found it very strange. At times like this, she should be tugging at her clothes, excitedly questioning, "Are you crazy? Asking me to serve that fox?" How could she be so calm now? Aster held Anna's hand, expressing respect for her choice. But she hoped Anna would join her in taking care of the little prince. Besides, being a maid for the prince is very popular in the marriage market. Aster promised to introduce her to many good men. At this, Anna remembered Klein's adjutant. When would they come? The prerequisite is that Klein knows Aster lives here. But it's difficult for maids to go out without reason. They both turned to stare at Mio, eyes gleaming. They now had someone who could go out without babysitting. Among us, you're relatively free. We'd like to hear news from outside too. It'd be even better if you could call others to come. Although Mio looked very burdened, she looked at Aster and smiled indulgently. Tempting you. Since the incident at the queen's palace, Anna seemed to have become a different person, often sitting with a vacant stare. Mio had also noticed her unusual behavior. But when Aster suddenly appeared, interrupting, she would smile and return to normal. Just then, Saya suddenly appeared. Aster was very shocked. She didn't expect classes to resume so quickly after such an event. Now she couldn't remember anything. The teaching was not going smoothly. The uncoordinated Aster kept stepping on the teacher's feet. Both were very tired, especially teacher Saya. Her entire foot was visibly red and swollen. At this rate, there's no way to dance at the victory ceremony. Due to the unfortunate event, the activity was moved up to this week. Because everyone wanted to forget, Aster could hardly imagine herself at the victory ceremony, wearing a dull dress, stepping on her partner's feet while dancing. This was really troublesome for others. Does this kind of man make your heart flutter? Teacher Saya knelt on one knee, inviting Aster to be his dance partner at the victory ceremony. This made Aster blush and her heart race. He said, "I do," very seriously and excitedly. Saya laughed and stood up, leaning close to his ear. It probably won't be the teacher that day. Aster's heart was racing wildly. If not the teacher, who could it be? After Saya left, Aster pushed the little prince out to sunbathe. He puzzledly asked Mio beside him, "Didn't I ask you to call Earl Caleb? Why did you call teacher Saya instead?" Mio clearly heard the conversation, but pretended to be clueless, saying Aster didn't specify who, just said to call someone. Aster was speechless. Although he was happy to see the teacher, he wasn't prepared for a lesson. On a whim, he asked Mio if he could dance. Mio, being very straightforward, said he didn't want his feet stepped on. Actually, Aster didn't intend to trouble him. Besides, it was hard to imagine Mio dancing. And so, they ended their not-so-pleasant conversation. Aster took the little prince to feed the fish under the scorching sun. When he saw the fish pond, he instantly broke into a cold sweat. The pond was crowded with fish, seemingly many more than before. There was even a giant koi fish. He had only seen it in photos before. It looked like it would take 3 people to carry. Aster found it a bit scary and quickly left. The next day, Klein came to Yuga Palace, still carrying a pure white bouquet. Aster was playing with the little prince. He suddenly handed it over, smiling and saying, "I was worried about you." Anna thoughtfully prepared tea and snacks for them. Before leaving the room, she winked at Mio. But how could the straightforward Mio understand? She abruptly pulled Mio out. She closed the door. Recently, Klein had been busy with Triumph I's affairs, so he came late. On that day, he would be promoted to Duke. This should be the king's method of declaring war on neighboring countries, to prevent them from targeting our swordsman. Now, apart from marrying him to the princess, there's nothing else they can give him. It said there were indeed such common practices, princesses famous for their beauty, or noble princesses from powerful countries. But he rejected them all. So, readers always felt Klein's true love was for the king, although his heart already belonged to someone else. Klein smiled, raising his hand to caress Aster's cheek. Then he took out the earrings passed down through generations of Queen Rohai. He had found them again in the ruins. Klein said with a grin, "The Queen of Rohai used to wear these, but I think they suit you better. So I personally asked for them." Aster broke into a cold sweat. The kingdom was already miserable enough, and now their earrings were taken. No wonder they launched a meteor attack. But to attack just upon seeing the earrings, could this be some kind of target? His hard-earned trust in Klein crumbled at this moment. After Aster fell into Yuga Palace, the first time he met Klein, there was a question he felt he must clarify today. He stood up and said, "I met Earl Salika." Hearing this name, Klein was visibly startled. He stood up nervously, anxiously asking, "He came to find you." "No, wait, didn't you lose your memory?" Aster took out that pen. "So this is his." The first time Aster showed Klein the pen, he only said he had seen it with Edie, but didn't say it was his. He was just trying to lead Aster to that conclusion. Actually, thinking carefully, this is a simple question. The initials on the pen Aster has are not Klein's, but those of the original owner's master, Sayu. At that time, Klein's eyes were clearly off. Why did he hide this? The original owner was just an accessory when he was with Edie. Now that things couldn't be hidden anymore, Klein grudgingly admitted, "This pen indeed belongs to Sai. I lied to you." At this moment, Aster's trust in him completely collapsed. Aster calmly put down the vase with a thud, his face expressionless. "You didn't lie to me. You just withheld information. It doesn't count as lying." Klein, feeling very guilty, asked, "Will you forgive me?" Aster didn't speak, turning his head away. Whether willing or not, he would eventually forgive him. But he was just a weak and lowly servant. Even deception and lies without malice could be fatal. Before he could take any measures, the situation kept deteriorating. Gradually, he lost his patience. From this moment on, he decided to reassess. Klein was no longer the absolute protector. Where exactly should he be placed? Klein reached out his hand, wanted to grab him, but was mercilessly rejected. "I'm not angry, and it's not that I can't forgive you. It's just not today. Could you please go back first?" Klein silently lowered his head and knelt on one knee. This was the only way he could think of to apologize. But Aster was very cold. Letting him kneel wasn't his idea. Originally, Klein came with a request. Now he didn't have the face to bring it up. "Next time we meet, I'll explain everything to you. Take care until then." After calming down, Aster felt like he was throwing a tantrum for no reason. He sat on the windowsill, holding the little prince. He met Klein's disappointed gaze. Clearly, what was needed now was a scene of mutual love. Klein's expression turned surprised. It turned out Aster was smiling and waving goodbye to him. At this moment, Aster felt like he was a big fool.